The boat came before dawn, when Caleb had owned the collapsed fishing cabin for less than 12 hours. He woke under a blue tarp to the sound of an engine missing every third beat. For a few seconds, he thought the noise was rainwater dripping into one of the cooking pots he had arranged beneath the broken roof. Then, a white beam swept across the ceiling, caught the exposed rafters, and vanished. Caleb pushed out of the sleeping bag, wearing yesterday's jeans. The cabin's front wall leaned toward the sound, like it wanted to listen too. A workboat emerged from the fog, scarred blue hull nudging toward what remained of the dock. A woman stood at the wheel with one hand wrapped in a red shop rag. "Amos!" she shouted. "I'm bleeding pressure, and I've got 800 pounds getting warm." Caleb stepped onto the crooked porch. "Amos is dead." The engine coughed. The woman stared at him, then at the ruined cabin behind him. "You know hydraulic lines?" "Some." "Some enough?" Caleb looked at the gap where 6 feet of dock had washed away, at the boat's failing engine, and at the coffee tins of fittings his grandfather had left above the workbench. His own family had given him this place because they believed nothing useful could come from it. The woman tossed him a rope. Then, "I guess you're who's here." 14 months earlier, Caleb Mercer had still believed refusing his father would hurt less the second time. It didn't. The boat sat on blocks in Bay 3 at Mercer Landing, a 34-foot charter called Sweet Caroline, though there was nothing sweet about the dark hydraulic fluid collecting beneath her stern. Caleb lay on a creeper with his shoulders under the transom and a flashlight clenched between his teeth. Above him, his brother's shoes stopped beside the puddle. Travis never wore shoes meant for puddles. These were brown leather, narrow at the toes, the kind that looked expensive even when they were standing in something expensive. "You about done?" Travis asked. Caleb removed the flashlight from his mouth. "Depends what you mean by done. I mean, Dad's waiting." "Then no." Travis sighed through his nose. At 31, he had perfected the sound of a man being delayed by other people's limitations. Caleb rolled out. His gray t-shirt had ridden halfway up his back, and his hair was full of fiberglass dust. He held up the split hose. "This is the return line. It's not the only problem. You replaced that last week. I replaced a line last week. Not this one. How many lines does one boat need? More than you want it to." Travis looked toward the open bay door. Beyond it, afternoon sun glittered on Pamlico Sound. The docks were busy with charter captains hosing down decks while tourists carried coolers toward the parking lot. At the far end of the property, a contractor was measuring the old supply room for the wine bar Brooke wanted. "Buyer's driving in from Raleigh," Travis said. "He'll be here at 4. Then show him another boat. It's part of the package." Caleb sat up. "What package?" Travis's pause was barely there, but it was enough. "The offshore fleet." "You're selling all 3? "We're upgrading. Dad said we were replacing the Helen May." "We are, along with Sweet Caroline and Lucky June." The Helen May had been Caleb's grandfather's boat before Amos's knees got bad. It had a broad stern, a loud Detroit diesel, and more patched wiring than original wiring. Caleb had spent 2 winters rewiring her one section at a time. He set the damaged hose on the concrete. "Does Amos know?" "Granddad doesn't run the marina. That wasn't what I asked." Travis crouched carefully, keeping his slacks clear of the floor. "The buyer needs an inspection sheet on each vessel. Dad wants yours attached before he gets here." Caleb looked up at him. "No. You haven't even seen the sheet. I've seen the steering. It passed the dock test. It failed 6 miles out last Thursday, and came back. Otis Boone tied alongside and steered her in." Travis's mouth tightened. "You hear one story at the diner, and suddenly you're the Coast Guard. I was on the boat." That stopped him. Caleb had gone out after Captain Farlow called from the inlet. Sweet Caroline's wheel had spun uselessly in his hands while the rudder stayed hard to port. The passengers laughed at first, because they thought the circling was part of the trip. Farlow kept smiling until he turned away from them. "You didn't put that in the maintenance log," Travis said. "I put it on Dad's desk. That is not the maintenance log, because Dad told me not to put it in the maintenance log." A metal door slammed in the main building. Both brothers turned. Dean Mercer crossed the service yard without hurrying. He was 60, broad through the chest, silver at the temples, and sunburned in the permanent way of men who believed sunscreen was a character flaw. He carried a clipboard. "There he is," Dean said, "our philosopher under a boat." Caleb got to his feet. Dean handed him the clipboard. 3 inspection forms were clipped beneath a glossy photograph of the fleet at sunset. Caleb's name had already been typed beneath the blank signature lines. Sign where it's marked. Sweet Caroline isn't safe. She needs a hose. She needs the steering cylinder rebuilt, maybe replaced. Dean glanced at the part on the floor. You said maybe. I won't know until I tear it down. Which you're not going to do 3 hours before a sale. That's generally when people tear something down. Before they sell it as working. Travis stood and brushed invisible dust from his knee. Caleb. What? Could you not make every conversation a hostage situation? Dean gave a brief laugh, but his eyes stayed on Caleb. Doc test was clean this morning. The failure is intermittent, like your judgment. Caleb looked at the signature line. It would take 2 seconds. A crooked C, a tall M. Dean had taught him that signature when Caleb was 18 and first started doing official repairs. A man's name means he was there, Dean had said. Don't put it somewhere you weren't. Caleb handed the clipboard back. I'll sign the other 2. You'll sign all 3. No, sir. Dean's jaw moved once. Across the yard, an impact wrench fell silent. Caleb did not look toward the mechanics, which meant he knew they were listening. Dean lowered his voice. Office. The office smelled of burnt coffee and the cedar air freshener Brooke hung from the vent because she said the marina smelled too much like a marina. A framed photograph of Amos holding a 58-pound cobia hung behind the desk. Someone had moved it aside to make room for an architectural rendering of Mercer Landing after renovation, white umbrellas, fire pits, people in pale clothes holding stemmed glasses. Brooke sat at the conference table with a laptop open. At 28, she had Dean's dark eyes and their mother's talent for making bad news sound like a scheduling problem. Oh, good, she said. Everybody's sweaty. Dean shut the door. Travis leaned against the filing cabinet. Caleb remained standing. Brooke looked between them. What happened? Your brother has decided he's the only honest person in eastern North Carolina, Dean said. I didn't say eastern. Brooke closed her eyes. Caleb. Dean placed the clipboard on the desk. Sign it. Caleb picked up the form and slid it toward Brooke. Red line 7. She did, lips moving slightly. Steering system inspected under load and found in reliable operating condition. It isn't. Dad? It was tested this morning, Dean said. Under load? Caleb asked. Dean ignored him. This sale pays the deposit on 2 new boats. New boats bring better charters. Better charters keep this place alive another generation. Caleb looked at the rendering. Looks like the fishing got in the way of the throw pillows. The fishing pays 12% less every year, Brooke said. Insurance is up, fuel is up, slip rentals are flat. I can show you. I believe you. Then act like it. Caleb rubbed the grease between his thumb and forefinger. He wished Amos were there, though lately Amos had stopped coming to family meetings. He claimed the chairs were uncomfortable. Caleb suspected the people were. Tell the buyer the truth, Caleb said. Take the repair off the price. Travis pushed away from the cabinet. We already gave him the maintenance summary. That summary says no major failures. It wasn't major. Nobody sank. Caleb stared at him. Travis looked away first, but only to check his watch. Dean picked up a pen. You're confusing stubbornness with principle again. And you're confusing getting away with something with being right. The room changed. Brooke whispered, Oh, for God's sake. Dean came around the desk. You think because you can rebuild a carburetor, you understand what it takes to hold this family together? No. You think your grandfather built this place by wringing his hands every time a machine made a noise? No, sir. Then what exactly do you think? Caleb swallowed. The truth came out quieter than he intended. I think you're asking me because my name makes the lie useful. Dean's face went still. For one strange second, Caleb noticed the wall clock had stopped at 2:17. He wondered how long it had been dead and how many meetings they had held beneath it without anyone caring. Dean picked up the form, signed Caleb's name, and dropped the pen. Brooke stared at the paper. Travis said nothing. Caleb felt heat climb his neck. You can't do that? I just did. Take my name off? You work for Mercer Landing. Not if that stays. Dean stepped close enough that Caleb smelled coffee and the peppermint he kept in his shirt pocket. You walk out over this. Don't come back tomorrow expecting everybody to admire your courage. I'm not asking anybody to admire me. You never ask. You stand there looking wounded until people offer. That landed where Dean meant it to. Caleb glanced at Brooke. She was studying her laptop. Travis had folded his arms. Dean opened the office door. Go cool off. Be back for the buyer at 4. Caleb did not move. Take my name off the form. Go. Dad. Dean's hand tightened on the doorknob. If you leave this property over one lousy hose, leave your keys. House too. Brooke finally looked up. That's enough. But she said it softly. To the room. Not to either man. Dean kept his eyes on Caleb. You want to make a show of not being a Mercer? Let's see you do it without Mercer money, Mercer tools, or a Mercer roof. Caleb waited for Travis to joke, for Brooke to stand, for somebody to turn the sentence back before it became real. Nobody did. He unclipped the brass keyring from his belt, the office key, shop key, fuel cage key, south gate key, and the blue-painted key to the back door of Dean's house struck the desk one after another. Dean looked down at them. Caleb walked through the service yard, past 2 mechanics who suddenly found the same outboard very interesting. He reached Bay 3 before he remembered his toolbox belonged to the marina. So did the creeper, the flashlight, the clean shirt in his locker. He took only the split hydraulic line from the floor. At the edge of the parking lot, Brooke caught up with him. Her sandals slapped the pavement. Caleb, wait. He stopped but did not turn. She pressed something into his hand, his truck key, removed from the ring. You paid for the truck, she said. He closed his fingers around it. Come back tonight, she added. He'll calm down. Will he take my name off? Brooke looked toward the office windows. That's what I thought. Don't do this like you're the only one who has to live with him. Caleb turned then. Her eyes were wet, which made him angrier than if she had been smiling. You signed off on selling Granddad's boat. It's a boat, yeah. He went to his truck. Where are you going? She called. Caleb opened the door and looked at the damaged hose still in his hand. He had no answer that didn't sound temporary. So he drove away before 4, while behind him, the white umbrellas in Brooke's rendering waited for a future nobody had built yet. He made it 9 miles before the truck started overheating. Caleb watched the temperature needle climb, while Sweet Caroline's split hose rode beside him on the passenger seat like evidence from a trial nobody planned to hold. He pulled into the gravel lot behind Dobbs Bait and Ice, shut off the engine, and sat with both hands on the wheel. The hood ticked in the heat. His phone buzzed. Brooke, he let it stop. It buzzed again. Travis this time. Caleb looked through the windshield at a hand-painted sign that said, Live Eels, though the word live had been crossed out and replaced with sometimes. Beyond the bait shop, rust-colored marsh grass bent in the wind. A heron stood in a drainage ditch with the patient disapproval of an old landlord. The shop's back door opened. Leon Dobb leaned out holding a mop. He was 54, round through the middle, and had a beard that began high on his cheeks and continued until it lost interest somewhere below his collar. You buying something? Leon called, or dying? Not sure yet. Buy something first. Caleb got out. Steam whispered from beneath the hood. Leon glanced at it. That answers the dying part. The radiator hose had split near the clamp. Caleb shortened it with Leon's pocket knife, stretched the remaining length back over the fitting, and tightened it enough to get home. Then he remembered home was one of the places he no longer had. Leon watched from the doorway while chewing the end of an unlit cigar. You need coolant? Water will get me where I'm going. Where's that? Caleb opened his mouth. Leon pointed the mop handle at him. You and your daddy finally shoot each other? No. Disappointing. I had $20 on Thanksgiving. Caleb laughed once. The sound embarrassed him. Leon's expression shifted, though not enough to become kindness. Come inside. You look like you've been fired by a church. The bait shop smelled of salt, damp cardboard, and the industrial coffee Leon sold for 75 cents a cup. A box fan in the front window pushed hot air from one side of the room to the other. Caleb sat at the counter while Leon poured coffee and did not ask anything for almost 4 minutes. It was the most mercy Caleb had received all day. Eventually, Leon nodded at the damaged hydraulic line. Caleb had carried it inside without realizing it. That yours? Sweet Caroline's. That boat still trying to kill people? Caleb looked up. You know, everybody who works the sound knows. Everybody who sells the sound pretends not to. Leon set a packet of powdered creamer beside the cup. It had hardened into a brick. My name's on the inspection form. You sign it? No, then your name ain't on it. Somebody drew it there. My dad drew it. Leon scratched his beard. That complicates Thanksgiving. Caleb told him the rest in pieces. He left out the parts that made him sound sorry for himself. and discovered that without those parts, the story was very short. Leon listened, rinsing the same coffee pot 3 times. When Caleb finished, Leon said, "Room upstairs is mostly boxes. I'm not asking for a room. I'm not offering a room. I'm saying there's a room, and it is mostly boxes. 2 separate facts." Caleb stared into his coffee. "You can move the boxes if they bother you," Leon added. "Some are empty. Don't get excited. I can pay." "With what? My truck's full of clothes. Clothes ain't currency unless they fit me, and judging by your tragic little waist, they do not." Caleb slept above Dobbs' bait and ice that night, on a cot between cartons of foam floats and outdated tide charts. The air conditioner in the window made a noise like a spoon caught in a garbage disposal. At 11, Brooke texted that Dean had changed the locks. At 11:15, Travis wrote, "You made your point. Now, quit being dramatic." At midnight, a third message appeared. "Amos, you got your red socket set?" Caleb stared at it. The set was under the bench in Bay 3. Amos had given it to him when he was 16, after Caleb spent an entire summer losing everybody else's sockets. "No," Caleb replied. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then returned. "Amos, damn thieves," Caleb smiled despite himself. "Amos, where are you?" Caleb did not answer. He could imagine his grandfather sitting in the brown recliner at his house near Oriental, glasses low on his nose, one thick finger stabbing at each letter. If Caleb gave him the address, Amos would arrive before breakfast with the socket set, a paper bag of biscuits, and an argument. He was not ready for any of those. The next morning, someone pounded on the shop door 20 minutes before opening. Leon shouted from below that decent criminals waited until after sunrise. Amos shouted back, "Then open up for an indecent one." Caleb came downstairs in his socks. His grandfather stood outside with the red socket set in one hand and a paper bag darkened by biscuit grease in the other. Amos Mercer was 81 and built like a fence post that had survived several attempts at removal. His white hair lay combed straight back. He wore green work pants, a blue shirt buttoned wrong at the bottom, and the expression of a man who had found exactly what he expected and still disapproved. Leon unlocked the door. "Coffee's not ready," he warned. "I didn't come for your coffee." "Good, because it's excellent. Your coffee could strip bottom paint. That's why fishermen like it." Amos walked past him and looked Caleb up and down. His gaze paused at the socks. "You run away without shoes?" "They're upstairs." "You quit wearing them on principle?" Caleb reached for the socket case. Amos did not release it. "You steal these?" Amos asked. "They're mine." "Then why were they in Dean's shop?" "Forgot them." Amos held on another second. "Don't forget your things in places people can use them to keep you coming back." He let go. They ate biscuits at the counter while Leon opened the shop around them. Amos did not ask for Caleb's version. That began to bother Caleb more than questions would have. "You talked to Dad?" Caleb finally said. "Yep." "And?" "Man's got a mouth on him. That's your son. Not one of my better designs." Caleb peeled paper from the biscuit. "Did he tell you I walked out?" "He told me you abandoned your job during a critical business transaction. I refused to sign off on a bad steering system." "I know." "How?" I asked Otis. Caleb looked at him. "You believed Otis over Dad?" "I believed the boat." Amos ate half a biscuit in 2 bites. Caleb lowered his voice. "Dad signed my name. I know that too." "You don't seem surprised." "I am surprised. I'm not theatrical. That's convenient." Amos stopped chewing. Caleb wished the words back, but only because he did not want to see the hurt in the old man's face. Amos folded the biscuit wrapper into a smaller and smaller square. "You want me to go down there and hit him?" "No. Good. My shoulder's bad. I want you to say something." "To Dean?" "To everybody." Amos studied him. "I say you were right. Does that give you a place to sleep?" "No." "Get your job back?" "I don't want it." "Then what does it do?" Caleb pushed away from the counter. "Forget it." "I didn't say I wouldn't. You made it sound stupid. I made it sound like it won't fix what hurts." Leon carried a bucket of thawing squid toward the bait cooler and quietly turned up the radio. Amos's voice softened. "Dean has spent his whole life mistaking control for protection. He thinks if he owns the roof, he gets to decide the weather under it, and you let him." There it was. Amos's eyes drifted toward the window. A pickup towing a skiff pulled into the lot. "Yes," he said. Caleb had expected a defense. The agreement left nowhere for his anger to land. Amos stood, wiped crumbs from his shirt, and took $70 from his wallet. "I don't need money," Caleb said. "It's for Leon." Leon looked over. "Room's 80. You told me 50. I saw him eat." Amos added a 10. Leon grinned. Caleb put his hand over the bills. "I can handle myself. Didn't say you couldn't." "Then stop." Amos met his eyes. "All right." He returned the money to his wallet. No argument, no wounded sigh. The easy retreat felt worse than being overruled. At the door, Amos paused. "Little Heron Point's still there," he said. "Roof isn't much, but the bench is dry." Caleb's fingers tightened around the socket case. "That's your place. I know where it is. You used to like it. I used to fit in the bunk." Amos almost smiled. "You used to complain less too." He left before Caleb could ask whether the offer was serious. For the next few weeks, Caleb treated independence like a punishment he had to perform correctly. He took every repair Leon sent upstairs, seized lawnmower engines, cracked outboard housings, a restaurant generator that had been fed the wrong oil by a man who insisted oil was oil. Caleb worked in the bait shop's rear shed, where the floor sloped and the radio received one gospel station clearly and everything else is static. He charged too little. Leon corrected the invoices after Caleb went upstairs. "You added $40. I added cents." He said he couldn't afford more. He arrived in a truck worth more than this building. He uses it for work. So do I. Mine's called a building. Word traveled. Fishermen began leaving engines by the ice machine with notes taped to them. Some notes included names. Some included symptoms. One said, "Made demon noise," which turned out to mean a bent propeller shaft. Caleb paid Leon the first month's rent in cash. Leon counted it, returned $20, and said the air conditioner's spoon noise reduced the property value. Brooke came by twice. The first time she brought his clothes in black trash bags and left before he came downstairs. The second time, she stood in the shed doorway while he rebuilt a fuel pump. "Dad says you're repairing Marina customers' equipment. They're Leon's customers. They used to be ours. Maybe ask why they left." She crossed her arms. "Not everything has to be a referendum on your pain." Caleb kept his eyes on the pump diaphragm. "Did Sweet Caroline sell?" Brooke's silence answered. "With my name on it, the buyer had his own mechanic inspect the fleet. And he reduced the offer." "Because?" "You know because." Caleb set down the screwdriver. "Did Dad fix the steering?" "Yes." That relieved him enough to make him angry again. Brooke watched his face. "You wanted it fixed. It got fixed. I wanted him not to lie. Well, congratulations, everybody lost money instead." She left with the sharp little bell over the shop door, announcing her departure as cheerfully as an arrival. Months settled into a rhythm. Caleb repaired what arrived. He stopped checking Mercer Landing's social media page, then checked it only on Sundays. White walls went up in the old supply room. Brooke posted photographs of driftwood light fixtures. Travis appeared in one beside the new boats, wearing a navy polo and resting his hand on a polished console as if he had invented the sea. Amos visited on Wednesdays. He brought odd jobs nobody had asked him to bring: June Talley's rusted winch motor, Otis Boone's alternator, a bilge pump wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. Sometimes he sat on an overturned bucket while Caleb worked. Sometimes he criticized the radio. He never mentioned Little Heron Point again. By winter, Amos had begun using both hands to rise from the bucket. By spring, he stopped coming every Wednesday. Caleb drove to his house once and found him asleep in the recliner at noon with the television playing an auction show. A mug of cold coffee sat beside him. Caleb fixed the loose porch rail and left without waking him. The last time they spoke, Amos called about a starter motor Caleb had repaired for Otis. "Sounds good," Amos said. "It better. I rebuilt it twice. First time not take. First time took fine. I didn't trust it. That'll wear you out." "What will?" "Doing everything twice because you don't believe the first thing counts." Caleb leaned against the bait shop counter. "You calling to insult me or praise the starter? Can do both. Good to know." Amos breathed into the phone for a moment. "Lamp at the cabin's gone," he said. Storm took it. Caleb pictured the green metal lamp above the porch, its glass cloudy with salt. "I'll find you another one. No hurry." 2 days later, Brooke called before sunrise. Caleb answered on the first ring. already knowing from the hour that nobody needed an engine fixed. Her voice broke when she said his name. He sat on the edge of the cot, bare feet against the cold floor, and stared at the red socket case beneath the window, while she told him Amos had died in his chair sometime during the night. On the table beside him was a new green porch lamp, still in its cardboard box. Caleb kept the porch lamp in its box for the funeral. He wore the one dark suit he owned, a charcoal thing Brooke had bought for him 3 years earlier and declared acceptable from 10 feet away. It had been fitted when he was 20 pounds lighter. The jacket pulled across his shoulders, and the pants reminded him of every biscuit Leon had charged against the rent. The church smelled of furniture polish and lilies. Amos had disliked both. Caleb arrived early enough to avoid being watched as he entered, then discovered half the county had arrived earlier. Fishermen cleaned up in strange ways. Otis Boone wore polished boots with shrimp net twine in place of one lace. June Talley had put on lipstick, but kept her welding burn sleeves because, she said, churches ran cold. Leon sat at the end of the third pew, beard combed into a shape that suggested effort rather than success. "You look uncomfortable," he whispered when Caleb sat beside him. "I am. Good. Means the suit works." At the front, Amos's casket was closed. Caleb was grateful until he was not. Dean stood beside it, greeting people with a steady handshake. He had lost weight. The collar of his white shirt hung loose at the neck, and he kept smoothing his tie after it was already straight. Brooke moved between clusters, carrying tissues, water, and small instructions. She touched Caleb's arm once as she passed. "You came." He looked at her. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. "Sure?" Travis stood near the guest book, accepting condolences as if he were receiving people at a business opening. But when Otis embraced him, Travis's face collapsed against the older man's shoulder for half a second. He recovered before Otis let go. Dean did not approach Caleb until the service was about to begin. "Your tie's crooked. Good to see you, too." Dean reached up automatically. Caleb stepped back. His father's hand remained in the air between them. "All right," Dean said. He took his place in the front pew with Travis and Brooke. Caleb stayed with Leon. The minister talked about Amos's dependability, his marriage of 49 years, and his devotion to family. Caleb listened for his grandfather in the sentences and found only a decent man who had never sworn at a fuel pump or cheated at gin rummy. Otis spoke next. "Amos once towed me 9 miles after I told him my engine was fine," he said. "Never said I told you so." Which was worse, because he looked like it for 9 miles. A low laugh passed through the church. June told them Amos had taught her to weld aluminum by standing behind her and saying, "Too hot," until she threatened to weld his truck doors shut. More laughter. Then Dean went to the lectern. He unfolded a piece of paper, but did not look at it. "My father believed the work was love." Caleb stared at the back of Dean's head. He did not say it much. Maybe he thought saying it would cheapen it. If he fixed your steps, changed your oil, brought fish you didn't ask for, that was him saying something. Dean's voice caught on the last word. He gripped the lectern and looked down. Caleb felt an ugly spark of satisfaction, proof that Dean could still be hurt, followed so quickly by shame that the two became indistinguishable. His father finished without crying. When he returned to the pew, Brooke put her hand over his. Dean allowed it to stay. At the cemetery, wind pushed across the open ground, hard enough to snap the canvas awning. Caleb stood apart while the family received folded condolences and paper plates wrapped in foil. There was no useful task he could find. The casket did not need repairing. The hole was already dug. Even the flowers had wire holding them where they belonged. Afterward, Brooke caught him beside his truck. "We're meeting at Granddad's house," she said. "Ms. Shaw needs everybody there. Today? Dad wants it done." "Of course he does. Please don't start. I said 4 words. You can start with your eyebrows." Leon, waiting by the passenger door, rubbed a finger over his own brow. "Mine ever caused trouble. You let me know." Brooke looked at him. "You must be Leon. Depends who owes money." To Caleb's surprise, she smiled. Amos's house looked indecently normal. His garden hose remained curled beside the porch. A coffee cup with a broken handle sat on the rail. Inside, the auction show was frozen on the television because someone had paused it the morning Amos died and never pressed play. They gathered around the dining table. Dean took Amos's chair, then seemed to realize what he had done. He stood and moved to another without comment. Ms. Evelyn Shaw had handled the Mercer family's paperwork since before Caleb was born. She wore navy blue, carried one thin folder, and declined Brooke's offer of coffee. "I'm not going to turn Amos into paperwork more than necessary," she said. He was clear. Most of the major property arrangements were settled years ago. Mercer Landing belonged primarily to Dean, with Amos's remaining interest passing to him. The charter vessels went to Travis, including the Helen May. Brooke received Amos's share of 3 shoreline cottages she had already managed. Personal savings would pay final expenses, taxes, and several small gifts. Caleb listened without surprise. He had expected nothing. Expecting nothing was supposed to prevent humiliation. It did not. Ms. Shaw closed the folder. "There is also the Little Heron Point parcel and cabin." Travis shifted in his chair. Dean looked at Caleb. "It's not worth much." "Then why mention it?" Caleb asked. "Because it has to go somewhere." Brooke turned a water glass in a damp circle. The roof came down in the last storm. "Half of it," Travis said. "The other half's considering its options." Nobody laughed. Ms. Shaw said, "Your grandfather wanted every member of the family to have something connected to the water. He did not specify the disposition of that parcel, only that it remain with one of you if possible." Caleb wondered whether Amos had meant him. He hated himself for wondering. Dean folded his hands. "Brooke and Travis already have property. I have the marina. You can take Little Heron." The offer arrived too smoothly. Dean had prepared it. "As what?" Caleb asked. "Your part." "My part of what?" "The family property." "The family I'm not in?" Brooke exhaled his name. Dean's face tightened. "I'm trying to include you. You're giving me a condemned shack in a marsh. You can refuse." Ms. Shaw looked down at the folder, granting the argument privacy without leaving. Travis said, "The land might sell someday." "To who?" Brooke asked. "Mosquitoes?" Dean's mouth curved. "Your grandfather believed every Mercer should get something appropriate." The words settled over the table. Caleb saw Amos on the bait shop stool, folding a biscuit wrapper. "Don't forget your things and places people can use them to keep you coming back." He looked around the room. Travis had received the boats but could not meet his eyes. Brooke had received cottages already tied to Dean's plans. Dean had received the thing he had spent his life demanding, and Caleb had been offered the only place none of them wanted. "Okay," he said. Dean blinked. "Okay what? I'll take it." Brooke stopped turning the glass. "You haven't seen it in years," she said. "I remember it. It's worse. Most things are." Dean leaned back. "You understand there's no marina access, no equipment, no claim on anything else. I understand you're nervous. I might say yes. I'm making sure you know what you're getting." Caleb looked at him. "So am I." Ms. Shaw opened her folder again. The papers took 15 minutes. Caleb signed where she pointed. He used his own pen. Travis waited until Dean and Brooke went into the kitchen before approaching him. "You did that to irritate him." "That's a bonus. I'm serious. The cabin's a liability." "So's Sweet Caroline." Travis flinched. Caleb lowered his voice. "How's the new fleet?" "Fine. Heard you had electrical trouble on the Kingfisher." "Who told you?" "Electricity." Travis almost smiled. "It vanished. You could come by sometime." "Could I?" "I mean, after hours." Caleb stared at him. Travis rubbed the side of his neck. "Forget it. That seems popular." He walked away before Travis could answer. Brooke met Caleb on the porch carrying an old ring with 2 keys. "One's the cabin," she said. "Other might be the shed, or a padlock Granddad threw away in 1998. Caleb took them. "He talked about you," she said. "When? All the time?" He could have called. He did call. The porch boards creaked beneath Caleb's shoes. Brooke looked tired enough to be honest. "You're mad he didn't fix it." "I'm mad he knew." "Knew what?" "What Dad was like." She glanced through the screen door. Dean stood in the kitchen with his back to them, washing coffee cups nobody had used. "We all knew," she said. That did not make Caleb feel less alone. Little Heron Road disappeared beneath water twice before Caleb reached the cabin. He waited for the tide to pull back, then drove through ruts deep enough to scrape the truck's frame. The place appeared beyond live oaks bent by years of wind. One corner of the roof had fallen inward, taking most of the kitchen ceiling with it. The porch sagged, marsh vines climbed the chimney. What remained of the dock reached into the sound like a broken finger. Caleb stood in the yard with the boxed lamp under one arm and Amos's keys in his hand. "Appropriate," he said. The front door key still worked. Inside, damp had swollen the floorboards and peeled wallpaper from the walls. A dead crab lay beneath the table. Caleb could not imagine how it had gotten there and respected the effort. The workbench along the back wall remained dry. Above it, coffee tins were arranged on 2 shelves, each labeled in Amos's blocky handwriting. Brass, fuses, clamps, O-rings, things that don't fit. Caleb opened the last one. It was full. He spent the afternoon clearing broken boards, stretching a tarp across the missing roof, and testing the old hand pump. Muddy water came first, then clear. The electric line was dead, so he could not install the lamp properly. He screwed it above the porch anyway, its new green shade catching the last light. By dark, his shoulders shook from fatigue. He heated canned soup on a camping burner and ate it from the pot. There was no signal on his phone, no traffic on the drowned road, no sound except insects, water, and the tarp snapping overhead. He slept in his jeans because the cabin had no lock he trusted. Sometime in the black hour before morning, an engine woke him. Caleb pushed outside and watched a workboat limp through the fog. A woman at the wheel called for Amos. Her hand was wrapped in a red rag, her hydraulic line was bleeding, and her catch was getting warm. By the time she tossed the rope, Caleb understood why Amos had kept the fittings. He caught it, wrapped it around the porch post because the nearest dock cleat was underwater, and shouted, "Easy on the throttle!" The woman leaned over the rail. "You always fix boats barefoot?" Caleb looked down. "One time only." "Good, because that's upsetting." The boat struck the broken dock hard enough to shake loose a board. Caleb jumped the gap, landed badly, and nearly went into the water. The woman hauled him upright by his shirt. "You sure you're who's here?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the new green lamp above the ruined porch, then at the tools waiting in the cabin. "No," he said, "but tie off anyway." The woman tied the stern line to a piling that moved 3 inches when the rope tightened. "I don't like that," Caleb said. "I don't like any of this." She killed the engine. The sudden quiet exposed water slapping the hull and the wet hiss of pressure escaping somewhere below deck. Caleb crouched beside the steering ram. Hydraulic fluid had spread in a dark sheet across the compartment. What happened? Turned east past Branch Shoal. Wheel got soft. Then it got philosophical. What does that mean? It stopped believing turns mattered. He found the failed line behind a metal bracket. It had rubbed against the sharp edge until the outer jacket wore through. Amos would have spotted it months ago. Caleb heard the thought in his grandfather's voice and resented both of them. "Your name?" the woman asked. "Caleb." She waited. "Mercer." That made her lean closer. In the first gray light, he saw a long face, dark hair knotted beneath a faded red cap, and a thin scar through one eyebrow. "Dean's Caleb?" Caleb looked into the compartment. "Depends who's asking." "Mara Velez." She offered the hand without the red rag. Caleb shook it. "Amos mentioned a Caleb," she said. "What did he say?" "That you could hear a bad bearing through a wall." Caleb tried not to show how much the small sentence cost him. "He say anything else?" "Sure." Mara climbed down into the compartment beside him. Caleb waited. She pointed at the damaged fitting, mostly about boats. The line used an older flare size Caleb had not seen in years. He searched the first coffee tin, then the second. The one labeled brass held elbows, couplers, compression sleeves, and 3 objects that looked as if they had been invented during an argument. Mara stood in the doorway watching him. "You finding something?" "I'm being judged by dead hardware." Amos labeled everything. He labeled a tin, things that don't fit. They don't. Caleb found the correct adapter beneath 2 corroded washers. He held it up. Mara smiled for the first time. "See? The hose itself could be shortened past the worn section, but not by enough." Caleb needed another foot. He searched under the bench and found coils too narrow, too stiff, or cracked by age. "What's the nearest place open?" Mara asked. "Leon's in about an hour. Mercer Landing has parts. Mercer Landing opens at 7. It's 6:15. I don't have a key." She studied him. "Thought that was your family's marina." "It is." "And you don't have a key." "Nope." "Do you have shoes?" "Nope." Mara pulled off her cap, rubbed her forehead, and put it back on. Strong operation so far. Caleb found a length of hose attached to an old hand control valve beneath the bench. It was faded, but uncracked. He bent it, checked the jacket, then tested the fittings against Amos's adapter. This might get you to the buyer. Might? I can tell you yes if you prefer prettier lying. She looked at him for a beat too long. No, she said. Might's fine. He cut the salvage line and assembled the repair while Mara held the flashlight. She anticipated what he needed without being asked, shifting the beam before his hand blocked it, passing a wrench by size rather than whichever one was nearest. You work on your own boat? He asked. Workboat works, I work. That wasn't what I asked. My uncle had Esperanza before me. He taught me enough to know when I'm in trouble. Caleb glanced at the blue hull. You named it Hope? He did. I would have named it Paid Off. The system had sucked air. Caleb refilled the reservoir from a half-used jug under Amos's bench, then opened the bleed valve. Turn the wheel left. Mara turned it. Again. It's already left, then right. You inspire confidence. You came to a building with no roof. I came to Amos. The words landed without malice, which made them harder to ignore. They bled the steering twice. Caleb wiped the fittings dry, then had Mara work the wheel while he watched for seepage. Nothing. That gets you back, he said. Replace the whole line before you go out again. Today? Today would be popular. I have to make the processor by 8. After. I have pots to pull. Not with that hose. Mara gave him the look of someone accustomed to receiving opinions she had not purchased. How much? Caleb looked at the salvage line. Amos's fluid. The fitting he had found in a coffee tin. 40. For 2 hours before sunrise? Hour and 10 minutes. For knowing where a dead man kept an adapter nobody else carries? He wiped his hands. 50? I'll pay you when I sell. All right, you don't know me. You know where I live. Mara glanced at the fallen kitchen roof. That argument needs work. She started the engine. It still missed, though less dramatically now. What's that cough? Caleb asked. Injector. How long? Since March. What month do you think it is? The month I can't afford injectors. She backed Esperanza away from the dock, testing the wheel in both directions. Before turning toward open water, she called, You got a phone? Somewhere inside. Give me the number. He shouted it twice over the engine. Mara entered it with one thumb, then held up the screen. I'm texting so you have mine. What if I don't want it? You'll want the $50. The boat disappeared into the brightening fog. Caleb stood on the broken dock until the engine noise faded. His bare feet were black with mud and hydraulic fluid. Behind him, the cabin looked worse in daylight. The tarp had pulled loose at one corner. Rainwater had soaked his sleeping bag. A raccoon or other criminal had punctured the soup can he left by the porch. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Leon, 2 from Brooke, and a text from Mara. You are officially saved under Barefoot Maybe. He changed it to Mara Velez and immediately felt foolish. Leon answered his return call with, You dead? Not today. You weren't upstairs. I went to the cabin. You spending the night there? Did Roof spend it with you? Mostly. Leon was quiet. Caleb picked up a piece of fallen ceiling and tossed it into the growing pile outside. Somebody came by for Amos, he said. Who? Mara Velez. Leon whistled. Crab Mara. Is there another kind? There's Church Mara, but she lives in Virginia and thinks dancing is foreplay for damnation. Why do you know that? I sell bait. People confess around frozen shrimp. Caleb told him about the line. Charger? Leon asked. 50? Did she laugh? No, she likes you. She left. Exactly. Caleb told him he would return for the rest of his clothes. Leon paused again. No hurry. Rooms paid through Tuesday. I paid through the month. Then definitely no hurry. The call ended before Caleb could say, thank you. He spent the rest of the morning trying to make one room weatherproof. Beneath a warped cabinet, he found an unopened roll of heavy plastic. Amos had stored nails in a pickle jar, sorted by length. Caleb built a temporary wall between the dry back room and the collapsed kitchen, then reinforced the tarp with rope tied through pieces of garden hose so the grommets would not tear. Every solution led to 2 new problems. The sill beneath the west wall was soft. 3 porch joists had rotted through. The dock ladder had 1 rung and a family of barnacles. The old wood stove drew badly enough to smoke him out before noon. He wrote a list on the back of a bait receipt. Roof, power, dock, floor, road, money. He circled the last one, then added shoes. Around 2, an engine approached. Caleb stepped onto the porch expecting Mara. A narrow aluminum skiff nosed through the reeds instead. Otis Boone sat at the tiller wearing the same polished boots from the funeral, now covered in mud. "Heard the light was on," Otis said. Caleb looked at the unpowered green lamp. "It isn't. News travels faster than electricity." Otis tied up without asking whether the piling was safe. He carried a canvas bag onto the porch and placed it on the bench. Inside was a carburetor, old enough to vote and corroded enough to regret it. "What's this?" "My airboat won't idle. I'm fixing the cabin." Otis looked around. "You ain't winning. I don't have a parts washer." Amos used a roasting pan. "I don't have solvent." "Blue jug under the bench?" Caleb checked. The blue jug was there. Otis lowered himself into the only intact chair. "Coffee?" "No power." "Propane stove?" "No coffee." "Red tin behind the flour." Caleb opened the cabinet. A red tin sat behind a paper sack of flour that had become one solid object. The coffee inside smelled faintly stale and entirely familiar. "You people know this place better than I do," Caleb said. Otis removed his cap. "We were here." The sentence was simple. Caleb felt shut out by it. He filled the percolator from the hand pump. "Why?" "Fishing, mostly." "I know that." "Then why ask?" "Because Mara showed up at 5 in the morning like there was a mechanic on duty." There was. Amos was 81. Didn't slow his opinions. He was coming out here. Otis watched him fit the percolator onto the flame, less toward the end. Sometimes we brought things to his house. Sometimes he talked us through a fix over the phone. Sometimes we came here and found what he left. What he left where? Otis pointed beneath the bench. Caleb crouched. Several wooden cubbies had been built against the back wall, low enough that he had overlooked them. Each held a paper grocery sack with a name written across it. Boone, Talley, Velez, Farlow. 3 more names Caleb recognized from boats around the Sound. He pulled out the Velez sack. Inside were 2 hydraulic filters, an injector seal kit, and a penciled note on cardboard. "Mara, line behind bracket is rubbing. Fix before August." Caleb stared at the note. It was late September. Otis leaned forward. "Everything all right?" He knew about the hose. Likely. Why didn't he fix it? Maybe she didn't bring the boat. Why didn't she? You'd have to ask the woman whose business that is. Caleb returned the parts to the sack. Amos had seen the problem, bought what was needed, labeled it, and waited. There was something familiar in that way of caring, quiet preparation followed by silence, until the prepared thing was almost too late to matter. The coffee boiled hard enough to spit from the lid. Otis drank it black and claimed it tasted fine. Caleb believed him because Otis's standards had survived Leon's coffee. He cleaned the carburetor in Amos's roasting pan. Otis held parts and talked about everything except the cabin, shrimp prices, the new dock lights at Mercer Landing, a man in Bayboro who had tried to clear a fuel line with compressed air and launched gasoline into his own hat. The airboat carburetor needed a gasket Caleb did not have. He cut one from sheet material in Amos's cabinet. When Otis left, he put $40 beneath the red coffee tin. Caleb found it 10 minutes later and ran to the porch, but the skiff had already entered the reeds. At 4, Mara returned. Esperanza rode lower in the water. Though the crab bushels were gone, she brought 2 new bushels, one balanced on each hip as she crossed the broken dock. Caleb stared at them. "You sold the crabs, then bought them back? These are a different personality of crab. I said $50, so take the money." She tucked folded bills into his shirt pocket. "What are these?" "Your crabs." "I don't need 2 bushels. Then you need friends. I don't have anywhere to cook them." Mara looked toward the cabin chimney. "You got a pot?" "No." She walked past him. "Amos has one under the bunk." Caleb followed her inside. "You know where everything is too?" "Not everything." She pulled a dented stock pot from beneath the bunk and held it up. "Just the important stuff." "That pot has a dead spider in it," Caleb said. Mara tipped the pot. The spider fell onto the floor and scurried beneath the bunk. Not anymore. She carried the pot to the hand pump, while Caleb built a fire outside. He had boiled crabs before, but never without a proper burner, newspaper, seasoning, or a table that did not tilt toward the marsh. Mara found a rusted grate behind the shed and balanced it over 2 cinder blocks. "What do you season with?" Caleb asked. Whatever Amos has. He's been dead a week. Seasoning lasts. She returned from the cabin with a yellow can of spice blend and a bottle of vinegar clouded with age. Caleb examined the vinegar. This may be older than I am. It's had time to improve. Things don't improve just because nobody touches them. Mara looked at the cabin. Good point. Caleb called Otis because 2 bushels were absurd for 2 people. Otis called June Tally without asking. June called Leon because she wanted to know whether Caleb had actually left his father's marina, or if people had exaggerated for entertainment. Leon arrived with corn, a folding table, and a loaf of white bread. You had food? Caleb asked. I own a bait shop, not a graveyard. You charged me for stale crackers last month. They were vintage. June came in a welding truck painted yellow beneath 20 years of soot. She was 59, tall and narrow, with close-cropped gray hair and 1 silver hoop in each ear. She stepped out carrying a toolbox. I thought we were eating, Caleb said. We are. What's the toolbox for? June looked at the porch. Emotional support. They spread newspaper over the folding table and ate while the last light turned the sound pink. Caleb cracked claws with the handle of a screwdriver until June took it from him and produced a wooden mallet from her toolbox. Mara sat across from him, sleeves pushed past her elbows. Without the red cap, her dark hair fell loose enough to keep catching in her mouth. Each time it did, she tucked it back with increasing annoyance. So, how'd you know Amos? Caleb asked. She sucked seasoning from her thumb before answering. My uncle Mateo fished with him. On the Helen May, before she got painted pretty. Amos hired him when nobody else would. Why wouldn't they? Because Mateo was terrible. Otis laughed into his beer. Mara pointed at him. He was. Hard worker, terrible fisherman. Got seasick looking at weather maps. Amos kept him? Caleb asked. He said a man could learn the water faster than he could learn to show up on time. Caleb could hear Amos saying it. The rhythm was exact. Mateo bought Esperanza with Amos's help, Mara continued. When his lungs got bad, I took over. You crab full time? When the crabs cooperate. I clean rental houses when they don't. Leon reached for the bread. You could clean this cabin. I said rental houses. Somebody pays for those. June examined the roof while chewing. West plate's gone soft. Caleb felt an immediate need to defend wood he had not owned for a full day. Just in the kitchen. Walls spreading. It's been spreading a while. That's supposed to comfort me? She wiped her hands, took a small level from the toolbox, and set it against a porch post. The bubble ran to one end so hard it seemed frightened. Cabin wants to lie down, June said. Caleb collected shells into an empty bushel. I know what it wants. You plan to stop it? I've got a list. Would listen to lists? Mara hid a smile behind her cup. Caleb disliked being watched while people discovered problems he had already discovered. It made his failures feel communal. I can handle the cabin, he said. The conversation quieted by a degree. Otis looked toward the water. Leon picked at the newspaper. June slid the level back into her toolbox. Didn't say you couldn't? It was exactly what Amos had said in the bait shop. Caleb got up and carried the bushel of shells toward the marsh before anyone could see his face. Mara followed a minute later with the second one. You always get mad when people offer help? She asked. I'm not mad. You're throwing crab shells like they owe you money. He dumped them beyond the grass. I took the place yesterday. I'd like 24 hours before everybody decides I can't manage it. June decides nobody can manage anything. It's why she owns tools. I have tools. You have 3 screwdrivers and a roasting pan. I have a socket set. Sorry, didn't realize you were a corporation. They walked back in the dark. Otis had lit 2 kerosene lanterns. Their glow warmed the cabin windows and softened the tarp enough that, from the yard, the place almost looked whole. Mara stopped beside him. You know why I brought the crabs? Because they were a different personality. Because Amos would have fed everybody after a repair like that. I'm not Amos. No. The answer came too quickly. Mara adjusted her grip on the empty bushel. He would have charged $20 and insulted my steering. You charged $50 and fell off your own dock. Nobody's confused. Caleb laughed before he could stop himself. She bumped the bushel against his leg. Let people bring what they know. You can still be the one who stays. The others left after 10. June took measurements before she went and refused to explain what they were for. Otis carried the roasting pan to the pump, washed it, and returned it beneath the workbench. Leon packed leftover corn into a grocery bag for Caleb's breakfast. Mara was last. At the boat, she pointed toward the coffee tins. My part's still under there, filters and an injector seal kit. She stared at him. Injector seals? Amos had them. Of course he did. He left a note about the hydraulic line. Mara's mouth pressed flat. Said it was rubbing, Caleb continued. Said fix before August. I know what month it is. Do you? She stepped aboard Esperanza. Why didn't you bring it to him? Caleb asked. Because he was getting tired. He bought the parts. I didn't ask him to. Maybe he wanted you to. Mara untied the stern line with a sharp pull. Maybe I wanted him to sit in his chair and stay alive. Caleb had no answer. She started the engine. It coughed twice before settling into a rough idle. I'll come back for the seals, she said, when I can lose a morning. You're already losing fuel with that injector. You want to be right, or you want me to return? He looked at her. Mara eased away from the dock. Work on your sales technique, barefoot maybe. For the next 5 mornings, nobody came. Caleb told himself he was relieved. He needed time to clear the kitchen, reinforce the porch, and retrieve his clothes from Leon's. He bought a second-hand circular saw from a pawn shop and a cheap extension cord he could not use. The cash in his wallet thinned. On the 6th morning, Captain Farlow arrived in a skiff with a bilge pump that ran backward. On the 7th, a shrimper named Earl Pruitt brought an alternator and a paper sack of biscuits. By the 2nd week, Caleb had 3 engines beneath tarps in the yard and a coffee can of handwritten job slips on the bench. Boats began appearing before the sun, their running lights sliding through the reeds. Some men asked for Amos, learned he was gone, and left without unloading anything. Others looked at Caleb's hands, asked one question designed to test him, then gave him the work. He failed 2 tests on purpose. When Earl asked whether a fuel pump could be made better than new with household silicone, Caleb said yes, if Earl wanted a household fire. When another captain suggested bypassing an oil alarm, Caleb offered to disconnect the engine instead. They came back. Caleb drove to town for parts every afternoon. At night, he worked beneath kerosene lamps until mosquitoes covered his arms and raised red knots. He slept hard, woke stiff, and discovered that satisfaction and misery could occupy the same muscles. Payment arrived in inconsistent forms. Farlow gave him cash. Earl gave him shrimp and promised cash later. Otis brought the old generator Amos had once repaired for him. It runs, Otis said. Then why are you giving it to me? Runs ugly. I mean, why give it to me at all? Otis shrugged. I got another. The generator ran ugly because one engine mount had split. Caleb replaced it, cleaned the carburetor, and changed the oil. When it started on the 2nd pull, the cabin had power for the first time in years. He connected the green porch lamp before anything else. It glowed against the late afternoon, unnecessary and bright. June returned that evening with 4 steel brackets in the bed of her truck. She had shaped them to cradle the cabin's spreading west wall. How much? Caleb asked. Dinner. I'm serious. So am I. Not crabs this time. They fight back. They jacked the wall in increments while June listened to the wood complain. Caleb cut replacement blocking. Mara arrived halfway through with the new hydraulic hose he had ordered and stayed to hold the work lights. Nobody discussed whether she was losing a morning. The cabin rose by less than an inch. It was enough for the doors to close properly. Caleb made hamburgers on the camp stove. June ate 2, wrapped a third in foil, and told him the brackets would hold until he could replace the sill. Which means they're temporary, Caleb said. Everything is temporary if you neglect it long enough. Mara sat on the porch step, rolling a cold soda can along the back of her neck. That one free, or does he owe you dinner twice? Free advice is how I ruin people. Caleb tried to give June $80. She refused. He put it through the open window of her welding truck. She found it, added another 20, and tucked the bills beneath his tool bag. By the end of the month, he had earned enough to buy lumber for the dock or shingles for the roof, not both. He bought the lumber. Mara helped him set the first new piling from Esperanza. They worked at low tide, guiding the post into black mud, while Otis operated a homemade jet pump that sprayed everyone except the piling. You build this thing? Caleb shouted. Otis wiped mud from his glasses. June did. Explains the rage. June, watching from shore, raised one finger. They completed 12 feet before the tide returned. The new boards looked almost gold beside the gray broken dock. Caleb stood on the final plank, testing its weight. Mara joined him. Their shoulders nearly touched. "Not bad," she said. "It's 12 feet. 12 feet you don't fall through." I fell off the side. Different department. A truck engine sounded on the flooded road. Caleb turned. Dean's black pickup came through the live oaks and stopped beside June's welding truck. His father stepped out wearing a Mercer Landing polo. He took in the boats tied at the new dock, the engines beneath tarps, the repaired wall, and the green lamp burning above the porch. Nobody spoke. Dean looked at the hand-painted scrap of plywood Caleb had nailed beside the road. "Marine repair," it said. "Before sunrise by chance." Dean read it twice. Then he looked at Caleb. "What exactly are you doing out here?" he asked. "Working," Caleb said. Dean glanced toward the engines beneath the tarps. "On what?" "Boats, mostly." "I can see that." "Then we're off to a strong start." June picked up her tools with deliberate slowness. Otis became fascinated by a coil of rope. Mara stayed beside Caleb on the new dock, close enough that Dean noticed. His father walked toward the cabin. The yard had never seemed small until Dean entered it. He stopped beneath the green lamp. "You put that up." "Seemed better than keeping it in a box." Dean touched the metal shade with 2 fingers. "Your grandfather had one just like it. This is the one I bought him." Dean withdrew his hand. The quiet that followed was not empty. It held the funeral, the office keys, and Amos's coffee cup still waiting on the porch rail. Dean stepped inside. Caleb followed because allowing him to walk through alone felt too much like surrender. The workbench was crowded with parts. Job slips filled the coffee can. Dean removed the top one and read it. Caleb Mercer, Marine Repair, had been printed across the bottom, using a stamp Leon ordered online without asking. Dean turned the paper over, as if there might be a better explanation on the back. "You're using the Mercer name. It's my name, at a competing business." Caleb almost laughed. "This isn't a business. It's a roof problem with tools. Tell that to the 3 customers who canceled work at the marina this month." Mara appeared in the doorway. "Nobody canceled. You told Earl he'd have to wait 11 days. Dean looked at her. "And you are?" "Mara Velez." Recognition moved across his face. Mateo's niece. His niece who waited 11 days once. Caleb said, "Mara?" "What?" he asked. "I can talk to my father." Dean folded the job slip and put it in his pocket. "That belongs to me," Caleb said. Dean removed it and laid it back on the bench. "You think these people are coming because of you?" The question found its mark so neatly Caleb suspected Dean had been carrying it for years. "No," Caleb said. "They came because Dad spent 50 years making himself useful. Don't confuse inheriting his bench with earning his reputation." "I don't. Your sign says otherwise. My sign says, I'm awake by chance. You know what I mean?" "No, I know what you're trying to mean." Dean's gaze moved over the coffee tins, the grocery sacks in the cubbies, Otis's generator vibrating outside. Some of the anger left his face and was replaced by something Caleb could not read. "He shouldn't have been doing all this," Dean said. "Helping people, working alone out here, not at his age." "You knew?" "I knew he came." "You know about the parts?" "No." "The repairs?" "I didn't ask for an inventory." Caleb stepped closer. "You knew he was driving down a flooded road to fix boats, and you didn't stop him?" Dean's eyes sharpened. "You stop Amos." That was fair enough to make Caleb angrier. "He could have done this at the marina," Dean continued. "He chose not to? Why? You'd have to ask him." "Convenient." Dean looked at the bench. "He thought we charged too much." "You did. We charge what it costs to keep a real operation open." Caleb glanced at the fallen roof. "You got me there?" Dean rubbed his palm across his mouth. He looked suddenly exhausted. "Come back," he said. Caleb thought he had misheard. "What?" "We need another mechanic. Proper salary. Benefits. You don't have to deal with sales." Mara moved away from the doorway. Outside, June started loading her truck louder than necessary. Caleb stared at his father. "You came to offer me a job? I came to see what you were doing. And now? Now I'm offering you a way out before that roof kills you. Does my name come off the inspection sheet?" Dean's jaw tightened. "The boat was repaired. That wasn't my question. The sale is done. My name. Nobody was hurt." Caleb nodded once. "Then nobody needs me back." Dean turned toward the door. "Stop using Mercer on your invoices," he said. Caleb felt the room narrow around them. "You don't own it. I built the business attached to it. Amos built it, and I kept it alive. You're putting a wine bar where fishermen bought gloves, because fishermen buy one pair of gloves and complain about the price for 6 years. Despite himself, Caleb almost smiled. Dean saw it, and for a second they were standing in an easier time, arguing over something that did not matter. Then Dean said, "You want your own life? Build it with your own name." He crossed the yard. Before reaching his truck, he stopped at the fresh dock piling and pressed his boot against it. "You didn't brace the shoreside. We're not finished. Current comes hard after a north wind. Brace it before then." Caleb hated that he was right. Dean drove away without looking back. Everyone waited until the truck disappeared among the trees. June pointed at the piling. "He's right. Thank you, June. Truth doesn't become less true because an ass carries it." Otis coiled the rope. Sometimes becomes louder. Mara watched Caleb. "You going back?" "No." "You answered fast." "It's an easy question. Those usually need the slowest answers." He walked inside and took the stamped job slip from the bench. The name looked different now. Caleb Mercer, Marine Repair. Amos had not left him a reputation. He had left coffee tins, old parts, and people willing to test whether Caleb deserved another morning. Dean was wrong about the sign, but not entirely wrong about the rest. Caleb tore the bottom strip from the job slip. Leon arrived the next day carrying a plank painted white and a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches. "I heard your father visited." "Who told you?" "The county. He left 20 minutes ago. County's having a fast day." Leon set the board on the bench. "I made you a proper sign." Across it, in blue letters, he had painted Mercer's First Light Marine. Beneath that, "If the lamp's on, come in." Caleb ran his thumb over the apostrophe. "That's good," he said. "I know. Painted bait signs for 11 years before I got this handsome." Caleb took a brush from the shelf and opened the can of green paint June had used on the porch brackets. Leon watched him cover Mercer's one letter at a time. "Bad spelling?" he asked. "Names too long?" When the paint dried, Caleb hung First Light Marine beside the road. The smaller line remained. "If the lamp's on, come in." The first customer beneath the new sign was Mara. She brought Esperanza in at low tide and handed Caleb Amos's sack of injector parts. "I've decided to stop enjoying the engine's personality." "Smart." "How long?" "If nothing breaks, 4 hours. Something always breaks." 6. They worked side by side in the engine compartment. Mara removed the fuel lines while Caleb cleaned the injector seats. The space was cramped and hot. Their knees bumped whenever either shifted. "You can go do something else," Caleb said. "It's my boat. I'm aware. It's written on everything you own." Mara Velez had been etched into the toolbox, burned into the handle of a crescent wrench, and written in permanent marker across the fuel filter housing. "People borrow," she said. "People return. No, people say they will." He handed her a socket. "Who didn't?" "My uncle." Caleb waited. Mara fitted the socket over the retaining nut. "Mateo left me the boat when he went to live with his sister in Arizona. Said salt air was killing him. That's not borrowing. He also left $6,000 on the engine note and a live well that leaked. So, you got hope. I got character." She leaned hard on the wrench. It slipped, and her knuckles struck the block. Caleb caught her wrist before she hit it again. "Easy. I know. You're bleeding. That keeps happening around here." He cleaned the scrape with a rag. Her hand remained in his longer than the injury required. Hydraulic scars crossed her knuckles. One thumbnail was split down the center. Mara looked at his fingers around her wrist. Caleb let go. "Wrong socket," he said. "You handed it to me. Testing you." "You failed." They completed the seals without breaking anything. When Caleb started the engine, the cough vanished. Esperanza settled into a deep, even idle that seemed too dignified for her scarred hull. Mara stood at the wheel listening. Caleb listened too. A smooth engine changed the air around it. No missing beat to anticipate. No stumble waiting to return. "What do you hear?" she asked. "Injector 3's still a little dirty." She narrowed her eyes. "Kidding." Mara smiled toward the sound so he could pretend not to notice. He wrote an invoice for parts plus $60 labor. She read it. 6 hours, 5.5, $60. "You helped. I held tools and injured myself. Apprentice rate. Charge me what it cost. That is what it cost. No. That's what makes you comfortable asking." Caleb took the paper from her. You want me to add a nuisance fee? I want you to still be here in January. I'll be here. With what roof? The question irritated him because he had spent the previous night shifting buckets beneath 3 new leaks. I've got money coming in. You've got Earl's promise, Farlow's check, he asked you not to deposit until Friday, and $40 Otis hides under kitchen items. How do you know what Otis does? He hid money under my bait freezer for 12 years. Caleb set the invoice on the console. I'm not charging people marina prices. There are numbers between Free and Dean. He looked at her. Mara's voice softened. Amos didn't know that either. She paid the invoice, then added $80. Caleb tried to return it. She closed his fingers around the bills. Keep the engine running, I keep the boat. Keep the boat, I work. That's not charity. It's too much. It's what the repair was worth to me. She untied before he could argue. That evening, Caleb sat at Amos's bench with every invoice spread in front of him. He added what he had earned, subtracted parts, fuel, lumber, and the saw. The number remaining was smaller than the cash in his wallet, which seemed impossible until he remembered the roof had not yet entered the arithmetic. He wrote honest labor beside each unpaid job. The total made him feel greedy. He crossed it out, then wrote it again. A wind from the north arrived after midnight. Caleb woke to the dock lines creaking and rain beating the tarp. He pulled on his boots and ran outside with a flashlight. The new piling leaned toward the current. Dean's warning came back in his exact voice. Brace it before then. Caleb waded waist-deep into black water, wrapped a temporary line around the piling, and hauled until his shoulders burned. The dock shifted beneath him. One fresh board tore loose and vanished into the reeds. By dawn, the piling still stood, crooked but standing. Caleb sat in the mud beneath the green lamp, soaked through and furious. A thermos appeared beside his knee. Mara lowered herself onto the porch step. Esperanza rocked at the damaged dock behind her. She did not say Dean had been right. She poured coffee into the lid and handed it to him. After a while, Caleb said, I should have braced the shore side. Yep. He drank. The coffee was hot enough to hurt, which was one of the things he liked about it. Mara stayed until the tide turned. They reset the piling with a jack, drove a diagonal brace from the shore side, and recovered the missing board 200 yards down the reeds. Caleb waited after it. Mara stood on the dock, directing him left and right, with the confidence of someone who was not chest-deep in cold water. You see it? She called. I see mud, 2 feet left. My left, the water's left. That clears it up. When he finally grabbed the board, a hidden oyster shell cut through the knee of his jeans. He climbed onto the bank, shivering. Mara looked at the blood. You're committed to making this place expensive in small ways. I got the board. You own more boards. I own that one. She shook her head, but her mouth curved. After they secured it, Mara stood on the end of the dock and shifted her weight. Nothing moved except the water beneath them. Better, she said. Caleb watched the brace hold against the current. He didn't even look happy about being right. Dean? He looked tired. People can be 2 things. He's usually one thing very loudly. Mara leaned against the piling. You wanted him to be proud. Caleb wiped mud from his hands. Of a crooked dock? Of you making one. He walked toward the cabin with the recovered board beneath his arm. That coffee was free, Mara called. The conversation apparently cost too much. The roof began before winter. June found salvaged metal panels from a seafood warehouse outside New Bern. Otis contributed rafters from a shed he had taken down years earlier and stored because he considered throwing away straight lumber a spiritual failure. Leon organized a Saturday workday without telling Caleb until trucks started arriving. Caleb protested for 11 minutes. Then June handed him a pry bar and said, You can be grateful after we stop your bedroom from becoming outdoors. They removed the broken roof in sections. The west wall had to be jacked again. 2 rafters crumbled at their ends, and a colony of palmetto bugs evacuated through the kitchen with more organization than the Mercers had ever shown in a meeting. Mara worked on the ridgeline in a safety harness she claimed had expired only emotionally. Caleb spent the morning trying not to watch her move along the rafters. At lunch, everyone sat in the yard eating sandwiches from coolers. Brooke's white SUV came down the road and stopped beside the trucks. She stepped out wearing jeans, sunglasses, and shoes worth protecting from the mud. Caleb set down his sandwich. You lost? I followed the parade. Her gaze traveled up to the roof. Mara stood silhouetted against the sky, fastening a panel. Who's that? Brooke asked. Mara. Boat? Mara? How do you know that? You said her name at Granddad's house. I did not. Then Dad did. Caleb looked at her. Brooke removed her sunglasses. Relax. He knows boat owners. She walked through the cabin slowly. New shelves had replaced the warped cabinet. The workbench was crowded but ordered. Invoices hung from a nail, and a dry erase board listed jobs by boat name. You really did it, she said. Roof's not done. I don't mean the roof. Caleb waited for the criticism. Brooke had never visited without carrying one, though sometimes she wrapped it in concern. She touched the green lamp switch. Dad hates the name. First Light? He says it sounds like a retirement community. He wanted me to stop using Mercer. That doesn't mean he wanted you to listen. A hammer struck overhead. Brooke lowered her voice. Travis says you're taking customers. People aren't luggage. I can't take them. You know what I mean. Dean put a tasting room where their parts counter was. The bar makes more in one weekend than the parts counter did in a month. Then everybody's happy. She looked toward the yard. Otis and Leon were arguing about whether a tomato belonged on a fish sandwich. June ate quietly while pretending not to referee. Are they paying you? Brooke asked. For repairs, for the roof. No. And that doesn't bother you? Constantly. Brooke smiled faintly. At least you're still you. Before leaving, she handed him a flat cardboard box. Inside was Amos's old brass wall clock from the marina office. Dad was throwing it away, she said. The face had yellowed. The hands were stopped at 2:17. Caleb ran a finger over the scratched glass. It was broken. Granddad fixed it twice. Then it broke twice. Maybe your third. She put on her sunglasses. Come for dinner sometime, she said. Whose dinner? Our house. Dad's? That sounds terrible. It probably will be. She left before he could decline properly. Caleb repaired the clock that night. The winding spring was intact, but the mechanism was packed with dust. He cleaned each gear and found a bent tooth in the escape wheel. Straightening it took 2 hours in language Amos would have recognized. At 1:06 in the morning, the clock began ticking. Caleb hung it above the workbench. The sound filled the cabin, steady and unreasonable. He was still awake when Captain Farlow arrived at 4:30 with a Seas trim motor. By sunrise, 3 more boats waited. Work gathered faster than Caleb could finish it. He began sleeping 4 hours a night. Jobs moved from the bench to the floor, then beneath tarps outside. He hired nobody because wages felt impossible, and because explaining Amos's system to someone else would force him to admit he did not entirely understand it. He stopped eating breakfast. He forgot to return calls. He charged more but remained convinced every invoice required an apology. Mara noticed. You write labor like it's a confession, she said, examining one. People like knowing what they're paying for. Then why did you cross it out twice? Pen slipped. Pen had a crisis. She had brought Esperanza in because the engine temperature climbed whenever she ran above 1800 RPM. Caleb checked coolant, belts, thermostat, and intake flow. The raw water impeller had lost 2 vanes. You ran aground recently? He asked. Not in a way I'm admitting. Pieces may be in the cooling line. How long? I can have it by dawn. Mara looked at the jobs stacked around him. Tomorrow's fine. You lose a morning. I lose an engine if you get stupid. I said dawn. She studied his face. Then dawn. The old impeller came out after dark. Caleb found 1 broken vane in the pump housing. The second was not in the inlet hose or heat exchanger elbow. He flushed both directions, found nothing, and convinced himself it had passed through. At midnight, a shrimper arrived with a bad starter. At 2, Farlow returned for the trim motor. At 3:15, Caleb installed the new impeller backward, caught the error, removed it, and started again. By 5, Esperanza pumped a strong stream of water. The temperature held it idle, and at 2000 RPM tied to the dock. Mara arrived with coffee. You sleep? She asked. I blinked slowly. She looked at the raw water pump. Find both pieces? System's clear. That's not what I asked. I flushed it. Both directions? Yep. She gave him the coffee. You're a terrible liar when tired. I'm a terrible liar rested. That should comfort me. Esperanza left before sunrise. At 7:20, Caleb's phone rang. Mara did not say hello. Temperatures at 225 and climbing. Caleb was already reaching for his keys. Shut it down. I'm west of Brant Shoal. Shut it down now. I've got pots on the north line. Mara, the engine noise vanished behind her voice. Caleb loaded tools into his truck, then remembered the problem was on water. Otis's skiff sat at the dock, with the key hidden in the cup holder, because Otis believed thieves deserved transportation if they understood choke. Caleb found Esperanza drifting 4 miles out, steam feathered from the engine compartment. Mara stood at the stern, with both arms folded. He boarded without speaking. The new impeller was intact. The thermostat opened properly. When Caleb removed the heat exchanger elbow, a black rubber fragment dropped into his palm. The missing vein. It had lodged crosswise where his first flush should have dislodged it. Mara saw it. Caleb closed his fingers. "What's that?" she asked. "Part of the old impeller. The part you said wasn't in the system. I said the system was clear. You said you flushed it. I did. Not enough. No." The honest word did not make the mistake smaller. They let the engine cool. Caleb replaced the elbow gasket and refilled the lost coolant. Esperanza started, but white vapor drifted from the exhaust longer than it should have. At the dock, a compression test showed 1 cylinder low. Caleb tested it again. Then a third time. Mara stood in the cabin doorway. "Doing it twice because you don't believe the first thing counts?" He looked at her. "Amos said that," she added. "About you." Caleb removed the gauge. "Could be the head gasket. I'll pull the head tonight. How much?" "Nothing." "How much is the repair?" "You're not paying." "That's not an answer." "I missed the vein." "Yes, I'll fix it." "And the pots I didn't pull?" "The buyer I missed?" Caleb's face burned. "I'll cover it." "With what?" "I have money. You have roofing debt and 4 checks in that coffee tin waiting for Friday." He turned toward the engine. "I said I'll handle it." Mara caught his arm. "Stop saying that, like it ends the conversation." He pulled free. "I made the mistake. What do you want me to say? That you were too tired and too scared to tell me you couldn't find the piece?" "I wasn't scared. You lied about the flush before the boat left." "I didn't lie. You changed the sentence until it sounded safer." The words struck with Dean's pen on paper behind them. Caleb picked up the tool tray too fast. Sockets scattered across the deck. Mara watched him crouch to retrieve them. "You don't get to turn yourself into free labor until everybody forgives you," she said quietly. "That's not repair." "What is?" "Letting the cost be real, letting me be angry, and fixing your business so being tired doesn't decide whether my engine lives." Caleb stared at a socket near her boot. Mara stepped around it and onto the dock. "I'm getting a ride home with Otis. I can drive you. I know." She walked toward the road without looking back. Caleb remained aboard Esperanza as the engine cooled around him. Above the cabin bench, Amos's clock kept time with a clean, hard tick. For once, Caleb did not take it down to see what might be wrong. Caleb closed First Light for 3 days. He turned off the green lamp before sunrise and tied a piece of cardboard beneath the sign. "Engine damage. My fault. Existing jobs will be called." He stood in the road reading it until the words stopped looking like language. His first call was to Farlow, whose trim motor still needed testing. The second was to Earl, whose alternator waited beneath the bench. He offered to return every unfinished job and refund every deposit. Farlow said, "You running away?" "No." "Then finish it Tuesday." Earl said he had forgotten about the alternator. "It's been here 9 days. See? Safe as a bank." 2 customers collected their equipment. One accepted a refund and stared at Caleb long enough to make sure he felt it. The rest agreed to wait. Caleb took Esperanza's cylinder head to a machine shop in New Bern. The machinist set a straight edge across it, slid a feeler gauge beneath the center, and whistled. "How hot?" 225. "For how long?" "Not long." The machinist looked at him. "Long enough," Caleb said. The head could be resurfaced, but one valve seat had shifted. Parts, machining, gaskets, coolant, and the cracked exhaust elbow Caleb found later came to $1,486. He wrote the number on Amos's dry erase board. Then he added what Mara had lost by missing the processor using the price posted that morning. The total became $2,206. Caleb had $2,400 in the business account Leon forced him to open. It represented the roof balance, winter fuel, 3 parts orders, and almost everything First Light had earned. He wrote Mara a check for $720. The cabin roof did not care, neither did the parts suppliers. He spent the first closed day pulling the head and cleaning the deck. He spent the second reassembling every job schedule in the order promised, rather than in the order of whoever arrived looking most desperate. On the third morning, Brooke came through the door, carrying Fury and a leather tote bag. "What did you do?" she asked. Caleb looked up from Esperanza's engine. "Good morning. Dad says you posted some public confession beside the road. It's cardboard. He says people are taking pictures. People enjoy cardboard." She dropped her tote onto the workbench. Mercer Landing had 3 cancellation calls yesterday. All 3 mentioned first light. The lamp's off. That doesn't matter now. Caleb wiped his hands. "Why are you here? To tell you this wounded honest man performance is hurting everybody." He looked at the cardboard sign through the window. Rain had softened one corner. "You think I damaged Mara's engine for publicity? I think you put my fault in letters big enough to read from a moving car because part of you wanted Dad to see it." Caleb started to answer, then stopped. Brooke saw the hesitation. "Oh, wow," she said. "You did. I wanted it clear. To customers or to him?" "Both." She pulled off her sunglasses. "You know what normal businesses say? Closed for repairs. They don't build a roadside altar to personal responsibility. Normal businesses don't sign other people's names. There it is. What? Every single road leads back to that inspection form. Because it happened. Yes, it happened. And now Dad's doing the Mercer Landing renovation, with half the commercial fishermen in the county watching you punish yourself beautifully." Caleb set the rag down. "You drove out here to defend his feelings? I drove out here because I'm tired of cleaning up after all of you. Then stop." Brooke laughed, but nothing about it was amused. "Sure, I'll stop. I'll stop managing the cottages whose income covers the marina note when charter bookings dip. I'll stop reassuring vendors while Travis buys uniforms and Dad pretends the tasting room can't fail. I'll stop telling lenders that the renovation is on schedule when every contractor changes the number." Caleb stared at her. She turned away, blinking hard. "You said the cottages were yours?" he said. "They are." "Then why are they covering marina debt?" "Because Dad needed collateral for the new boats. Travis and I agreed." "When?" "Before Granddad died." "Why?" "Because Dad said this was our chance to make the family business worth inheriting." The last word broke unevenly. Caleb leaned against the engine hatch. "You told me the bar made money. It does." "So, what's wrong?" "Everything costs more than the plan. Insurance, dredging, the kitchen vent. Travis booked winter charters before the new boats were delivered, so now we're paying captains to use other people's vessels. If spring is good, it's manageable. And if it isn't..." Brooke looked toward the Sound. He wanted to say she had chosen it. The sentence lined itself up neatly. She had helped Dean. She had turned the supply room into a bar and treated Caleb's refusal like a tantrum. Then he saw how tightly she gripped her sunglasses. "Does Dean know you're scared?" he asked. "Dad knows numbers. That wasn't my question." She put the sunglasses on the bench before she snapped them. "No," she said. Caleb nodded toward the stool. "Sit down. I'm still mad at you." "Sit mad." Brooke sat. He made coffee. When he handed her the mug, she took one sip and grimaced. "This is terrible. It's Amos's." Amos drank terrible coffee. They were quiet a while. Then Brooke looked at the dry erase board. "What's all that?" "Work." "No, that's panic with boat names." Caleb followed her gaze. Parts costs, promised dates, phone numbers, and arrows crowded the board. 3 customers had been written in spaces left by erased names. No system distinguished paid work from promises or emergencies from ordinary service. "It makes sense to me," he said. "That is what people say before an audit. I don't need an audit. You need folders. I have a coffee can." Brooke opened her tote and removed a laptop. "No, I didn't ask. I'm not giving you access to my money." "What money?" He stared at her. She almost smiled. "Show me the invoices." For 4 hours, Brooke sorted First Light into categories Caleb had resisted believing existed. Parts deposits, labor due, finished work awaiting pickup. Cash payments he remembered but had not marked. Barter he could accept, and barter that left him owning 26 pounds of shrimp, while the power bill remained unimpressed. She made a weekly schedule and left one morning open for emergencies. She set a minimum labor charge. "Nobody pays that," Caleb said. "Then nobody gets repaired. Otis will complain. Otis can pay in generator maintenance and gossip. Everyone else uses money." She found the check to Mara beneath his ledger. 720, lost catch. Does she want this? She should get it. That wasn't what I asked. Caleb took the check from her. It's what it cost. Brooke watched him. You don't have to make the business die to prove the mistake mattered. Mara said the cost had to be real. Real is not the same as fatal. The sentence sounded enough like something Mara might say that Caleb disliked it from both directions. Brooke closed the laptop near sunset. I emailed you the files. I hate files. You hate nouns whenever they require responsibility. At the door, she paused beneath the brass clock. You fixed it. Third time. She listened to the ticking. Dad didn't throw it away, she said. You said he did. He put it in a box marked storage. I stole it. Caleb looked at her. Brooke shrugged. I was angry. The confession surprised a laugh out of him. She smiled, then turned serious. Don't tell him what I said about the marina. I won't. And don't get smug. Wasn't planning to. You were born planning to. After she left, Caleb replaced the cardboard sign. Closed for 3 days, reopening with better sense. He turned the lamp on. Mara arrived after dark in Otis's skiff. She stepped onto the dock, carrying a paper bag from a fried seafood place. I saw the lamp. Caleb nodded toward Esperanza. Head comes back tomorrow. She put the bag on the porch table. June says you haven't eaten. June welds. She doesn't diagnose. She diagnosed stupid. That's chronic. Mara noticed the new sign by the road. Better sense, limited supply. He handed her the check. She unfolded it, read the amount, and looked at him. That's the processor loss, based on this morning's price. I had fewer crabs than that. You said 800 pounds. That was the first morning. How many this time? 560. Caleb reached for the check. I'll write another. Mara moved it away. I'll deposit this, then give me the difference. No, I'll apply it to the engine repair. You're not paying for that. I'm not. You are. This goes back into the account so you can buy the parts you're paying for. That's just passing the same money around. Yes, it's called a functioning economy. He folded his arms. Mara placed the check in her jacket pocket. I'm still angry. I know. You looked me in the face and let me take the boat. I know. You were more afraid I'd think you couldn't fix it than you were afraid it wasn't fixed. He forced himself not to defend the sentence. Yes. Mara waited, perhaps expecting him to soften it. He did not. She nodded once. Better. They ate fried flounder on the porch. Mara did not sit close to him. Caleb did not try to make her. Halfway through the meal, a boat light appeared beyond the reeds. Caleb started to stand. Mara caught his sleeve. You're closed. Could be trouble. Could be somebody who saw the lamp. The boat sounded one short horn. Caleb looked at the road sign, then at the green light burning over his head. If the lamp's on, Mara said, they come in. He switched it off. Darkness settled across the porch. The approaching boat slowed, turned, and continued up the sound. Caleb sat down again. Mara released his sleeve. It was the first repair he made that evening. The head came back flat, clean, and $400 more expensive than the machinist's first estimate. Caleb installed it with the cabin doors open to a cold wind off the sound. He worked from Brooke's printed checklist, stopping after each torque sequence to mark the step rather than trusting exhaustion to remember it. Mara watched from the porch for the first hour. You can leave, he said. I know. You standing there won't improve the compression. I'm not here to improve it. Caleb bent over the engine again. Mara eventually went to town. She returned with sandwiches and did not bring up the missing vein. That almost made the silence worse, but he allowed it to remain hers. At sunset, he turned the key. Esperanza's engine cranked twice and caught. A white haze drifted from the exhaust, then cleared. Caleb let it warm while watching the gauges. The temperature rose to 168 and stayed there. He brought the RPM up in stages. 1700, 2000, 22. The needle did not move. Mara stood at the wheel with one hand resting near the throttle. Test run, tomorrow. Why? Because I've been awake since 3. She looked at him. Better sense, he added. The corner of her mouth lifted. Tomorrow. They took Esperanza out at first light. Caleb sat beside the engine hatch with a temperature gun and a notebook, while Mara ran her through every speed she used on a working day. The sound was flat and dark beneath a winter sky. Their wake spread silver behind them. At Brant Shoal, Mara throttled back. This is where it overheated, I remember. You got very bossy on the phone. You wanted to pull pots with the gauge at 225. They were good pots. You can't harvest crabs with a melted engine. Depends how fast you work. She pushed the throttle forward. Esperanza climbed onto plane. Caleb watched the temperature gauge. 172. Mara held the course for 10 minutes, then 20. Caleb loosened his grip on the notebook. Good? She asked. So far. That's all I get? I could lie prettier. She laughed. He had missed that sound more than he wanted to admit. They ran north toward her line. The crab pots would be pulled the following morning, but Mara wanted to check the buoys after several days of rough water. At the fourth buoy, she cut the engine. The sudden quiet startled him. What? Nothing. Why'd you shut down? To see if it starts hot. Caleb recognized the kindness in the excuse and chose not to expose it. They drifted beside a low bank of cloud. Mara opened a thermos and passed it to him. Coffee? Does it hurt? Probably. He drank. Mara rested her forearms on the wheel. Mateo used to tell me every bad thing that happened on this boat was because I didn't listen. Were you listening? Not usually. Then he had a point. He also ran it aground in clear weather and blamed a reflective cloud. Those are dangerous. Pretty much sky reefs. Caleb smiled into the thermos. She looked toward the buoy. When his lungs got bad, he quit coming down to the dock. Wouldn't let me help him aboard. Said he didn't need to be carried around his own boat. That sounds familiar. I got mad. Told him Esperanza ran better without him. Caleb said nothing. He left for Arizona 3 days later. We're polite on the phone now. You could tell him. What? That you didn't mean it. I meant it when I said it. That's not the same as meaning it now. Mara took back the thermos. You practicing advice? Testing a concept. You call Dean? No. Brooke. She came here. That wasn't what I asked. Caleb looked at the dormant gauges. Engines cooled enough. Mara restarted it. Esperanza caught immediately. The test run lasted another hour. When they tied up, Caleb wrote the final readings on the invoice and handed Mara a folder containing every part receipt, the machine shop bill, and the amount First Light had absorbed. You made a folder, she said. Brooke made a folder. I resented it into compliance. Mara examined the total. This hurt. It did. You still open Monday? Yes. Then maybe it costs the right amount. She signed the completion line. Her hand brushed his when she returned the pen. Caleb looked at her. Mara did not move away. The brass clock ticked behind them. Esperanza's engine cooled with small metallic clicks. Mara leaned in first. The kiss was brief, salt and coffee and uncertainty. When she stepped back, Caleb's hand was still lifted near her waist without having decided where to go. That doesn't mean I'm not angry, she said. I assumed it meant the engine passed. It did. Good compression? She pushed the folder against his chest and walked to the boat. First Light reopened with posted prices, a real appointment calendar, and an emergency surcharge Caleb hated until 3 captains paid it without complaint. Otis handled arrivals 1 morning a week in exchange for dock space and coffee. His job consisted mostly of writing names on tags and preventing people from putting seized engines directly in the kitchen. Caleb turned the lamp off at 7 in the evening. The first time he did it with work unfinished, he stood beneath it for several minutes, fighting the conviction that somebody would need him the moment darkness came. Nobody did. The second time, Mara took him to dinner in Byboro. He kept his phone face up on the table. She turned it over. The third time, Dean called. Caleb and Mara were replacing Esperanza's aft deck boards. She had measured each opening twice and accused him of cutting once with excessive optimism. His phone vibrated on the workbench. Dean. Caleb let it ring. It stopped, then began again. Mara drove a screw into the new board. Answer it. You turned my phone over at dinner. You stared through the table. Caleb wiped sawdust from his hand and answered. Dean's voice came without greeting. Kingfisher's dead at Garbican Shoal. What do you mean dead? Lost electrical. Travis has checked the battery. Caleb closed his eyes. That tells me nothing. We have 6 clients aboard. Call your mechanic. He's in Hatteras. You offered me that job because you needed another mechanic. This is not the time. It never was. Caleb looked at Mara. She sat back on her heels, waiting. I promised this deck today, he said. Mara's gaze lowered to the half-installed boards. Dean said, I'm asking for help. The sentence sounded wrong in his father's mouth. It lacked apology, but it was still asking. Caleb set down the phone. I can be back in 2 hours. Mara picked up the next board. Go! You heard him? The marsh heard him. I'll finish when I get back. Sure. She did not sound angry. That made leaving easier until Caleb understood it should not have. He took Otis's skiff because Esperanza was trapped beneath the loose deck boards. The wind had risen from the southwest, chopping the open water. Kingfisher lay half a mile beyond the shoal with her anchor down. Travis waved from the bow while Dean stood at the console. The 6 clients wore matching red windbreakers and the displeased expressions of people who had paid to appear adventurous without experiencing inconvenience. Caleb tied alongside. Travis leaned over the rail. Battery reads 12-6. Congratulations. What? It's a number. Caleb boarded with his tool bag. The main breaker had tripped because a loose cable at the alternator had arced against the engine block. The terminal was blackened. The insulation had melted back 2 inches. Who installed this? He asked. Our mechanic, Travis said. Your mechanic hates you. Dean stood behind him. Can you fix it? Temporarily. Caleb trimmed the damaged cable, crimped on a new lug, covered it with heat shrink, and rerouted it away from the block. Kingfisher started. One of the clients applauded. Caleb wanted to throw the crimping tool into the sound. Dean tested the throttle. Good. Replace the cable before the next trip. It's replaced. It's shortened. Not the same. Dean met his eyes. All right. Travis escorted the clients back toward the heated cabin. When they were alone, Dean said, Thank you. Caleb waited for the rest. There was no rest. You could contract with us, Dean continued. Emergency coverage. Set your own rate. Mara was waiting. Who? Caleb laughed once. Never mind. He stepped toward the rail. Caleb. His father stood with one hand on the console, looking older than he had at the funeral. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't necessary. That was supposed to make the call valuable. Caleb could feel the old hunger trying to accept it. You didn't call me, he said. You called a mechanic. Dean's face closed. Caleb climbed into the skiff and left. Mara had finished the aft deck when he returned. Every board lay straight, each screw countersunk evenly. She was packing her tools. I said I'd finish, Caleb told her. You said 2 hours. It took 2.5. The tide leaves in 40 minutes. I came back. She lifted the toolbox. Yes. What is that supposed to mean? It means you came back after your father was finished needing you. He had people stranded. He owns 5 boats and employs 12 people. 6 clients were aboard. Then go. Help. But don't pretend the emergency made every choice for you. Caleb blocked the dock without intending to. What did you want me to do? Say no? I wanted you to know why you said yes. Because they needed help. Because Dean needed you. He looked away. Mara's voice softened. Being needed by him is not the same as being loved by him. You don't know anything about my father. No. I know something about waiting for one person to finally need you the right way. The words left them both still. Caleb stepped aside. Mara carried the toolbox past him. At her truck, she turned. The deck is done, she said. You don't owe me the afternoon. She drove away. 2 mornings later, Brooke called while Caleb was opening the shop. Did you fix Kingfisher? Temporary cable. Dad said you refused a contract. He offered one. You should have taken it? Why? Because we're using every boat we can get. Caleb switched on the green lamp. What does that mean? The new 40-footer is delayed again. Travis arranged an investor cruise for Friday, so he leased one of the old fleet boats back from the buyer. A cold feeling moved through Caleb before she said the name. Which boat? That's Sweet Caroline. He stared out at the dark water. Brooke, no. It's one afternoon. The steering failure was intermittent. Dad had it repaired. A hose was replaced. I never inspected the cylinder. The buyer did. The buyer's mechanic reduced the offer. Wind rattled the new metal roof. Caleb looked at the marine forecast taped beside Brooke's schedule. A fast-moving front was expected Friday afternoon. Small craft advisory likely. Cancel the cruise, he said. Brooke sighed. You don't get to run the marina from a collapsed cabin. Then, don't call me when that boat decides circles count as navigation. He ended the call harder than necessary. Above him, Amos's clock ticked toward weather nobody in the room could stop. Caleb called Travis before the coffee finished brewing. His brother answered on the 4th ring. Music thumped in the background. If this is about Sweet Caroline, Brooke already told me. then cancel. Good morning to you too. The front moved up. It's a 30% chance of rain before 6. It's a 100% chance after 6, with gusts over 40. We'll be back by 2. Steering failures don't use a clock. Travis lowered his voice. The boat passed inspection when we sold it. The buyer reduced the offer because it needed work, and he did the work. Who rebuilt the cylinder? I don't have the invoice in my pocket? Then find it. A door opened and closed behind Travis. The music disappeared. This is an investor trip, he said. 2 people, short run, lunch aboard, back before weather. Use Kingfisher. Kingfisher's cable won't arrive until Monday. Use any other boat. The new ones are booked. So, unbook one. Do you hear yourself? Yes. You left. Remember? You don't get to walk out of the marina, set up a folk art repair shop in a swamp, and then call before dawn to approve our schedule. Caleb looked at the lamp burning above the porch. Boats moved through the darkness toward other docks. I'll inspect Sweet Caroline today, he said. No charge. We have a mechanic. Your mechanic shortened a burned cable and called it replaced. You did that. I called it temporary. Travis breathed out slowly. Come at 4. After the lunch charter. I'll be there. Don't bring an audience. Caleb hung up. He reached Mercer Landing at 3:45. White lights glowed beneath the tasting room awning. Tall heaters stood on the deck where net bins had once been stacked, their flames dancing inside glass tubes. A group of tourists drank something orange while a musician played guitar beside a painted sign reading Soundside Sundowns. The marina looked prosperous from the parking lot. Closer, Caleb saw an extension cord taped across a walkway. 2 empty slips where the delayed boats should have been, and Kingfisher tied at the service dock with her engine hatch open. Sweet Caroline returned at 4:10. Travis stood at the wheel in his navy polo, smiling while passengers stepped ashore. He had always been good at smiling through arrival, as though any trouble before the dock belonged to a different version of the day. Caleb waited until the passengers left. You're early, Travis said. You're late. 10 minutes. Weather takes that personally. Dean came out of the office carrying a tablet. This necessary? No, Travis said. Yes, Caleb said. Dean looked between them. Do it. The steering cylinder appeared clean. The hoses had been replaced, including the worn return line. Caleb opened the fluid reservoir, checked for contamination, and had Travis turn the wheel while he watched the ram travel, smooth at the dock. He disconnected the tiller arm and felt resistance through the cylinder by hand. A faint catch appeared near full starboard, then vanished when he tested again. When was the cylinder rebuilt? Caleb asked. Travis opened a folder on his phone. March. Seals, gland, rod polished. Pressure test, passed. At operating temperature, it says pressure test. Caleb crawled farther beneath the stern. The polished rod showed a line so fine, he had to angle his flashlight to see it. There. Dean crouched beside him. What? Scoring? I don't see anything. Run your nail across it. Dean did. His nail caught. Could be old, he said. Could be. Travis folded his arms. You said you'd inspect it, not frighten everybody with could. Caleb slid out. I can't make it fail at the dock. That was always the problem. Dean looked at the cylinder again. What are you recommending? Don't take it. For a scratch? For the same intermittent failure it had when you signed my name. The service bay seemed to go quiet, though the guitar continued outside. Dean stood. Not now? When would you like it? We replaced the lines. The new owner rebuilt the cylinder. It has operated 6 months without another failure. That you know of. Travis checked his watch. I have dinner. Caleb blocked his path. If the wheel goes soft, pull the throttle, center the rudder manually if you can, and use the engines to steer. It has one engine. I know. Then why say engines? Because it's what you should be taking. Travis's face flushed. Move. Dean stepped between them. Enough. Caleb looked at his father. Cancel it. Dean did not answer. Please. That word reached him. Caleb saw it in the slight change around his eyes. Then Brooke came through the bay carrying a box of investor packets. What did he find? She asked. Travis said. A scratch. Caleb said. A reason. Brooke looked to Dean. Their father rested both hands on his hips. Beyond him, the orange drinks moved through the tasting room like little sunsets. We go out at 10, he said, back by 1. If conditions change, Travis turns around. Caleb laughed without humor. Conditions already changed. Your recommendation is noted. It was the office all over again, only this time, Caleb's name was not required. They could ignore him cleanly. He walked out. Mara's truck was parked beside the cabin when he returned. She sat on the porch steps with 2 paper cups. You keep buying coffee for somebody you're mad at, he said. I contain contradictions. He sat 1 step below her. She handed him a cup. How's Sweet Caroline? Going out? You inspect it? Dock test was clean. That's not an answer. The cylinder rod scored, could hold another year, could bypass underload tomorrow. Travis knows? Yes. And? Investor trip. Mara looked across the dark water. People do stupid things for money. I've done them for free. They drank without speaking. After a while, Caleb said, You were right about my father. I usually prefer apologies without involving your father, about being needed. Mara waited. When Dean called, part of me thought it meant he trusted me again. He does trust you. That isn't the same thing either. No. I left because I wanted him to pick me over his pride. Then he needed a cable fixed, and I acted like he had. Mara rested her cup between her palms. I'm sorry I left you with the deck. I finished it. I know. You shouldn't have had to. She looked at him. I didn't need the apology to end with you explaining that I was fine. Caleb nodded. I'm sorry, thank you. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. Rain began before noon Friday. Not a storm at first. Fine drops stippled the sound, while Caleb worked beneath the cabin awning. The forecast still placed the worst wind after 5. Sweet Caroline left Mercer Landing at 10:12, with Travis, Brooke, and 2 investors aboard. Caleb knew the exact minute because he had been listening to the marine radio. At 11, the front accelerated. Wind shifted west and rose hard enough to turn the sound from gray to white in less than 20 minutes. The Weather Service moved the small craft advisory forward. Rain struck the metal roof with a roar. Caleb called Brooke. No answer. He called Travis. No answer. At 11:37, Dean called him. Caleb answered with his heart already beating too fast. They lost steering, Dean said. No greeting, no argument, just the words. Position? South of Brant Shoal, drifting northeast. Engine? Running? Travis says the wheel's free. Anchor? Won't hold. Caleb grabbed his rain jacket. Who's responding? Tow company launched from Oriental and turned back at Broad Creek. Another says 90 minutes if the wind drops. It won't. I know. The emission sounded stripped from him. Caleb looked through the rain toward the dock. Esperanza was not there. Tell Travis to pull the access panel over the rudder post, he said. There's an emergency tiller fitting beneath the aft bench. He says he checked. Tell him the bench bottom lifts out. It isn't hinged. Dean relayed it. Caleb heard his voice change as he spoke to Travis, becoming too calm. A minute passed. He found the fitting, Dean said. No tiller arm. Caleb closed his eyes. The arm had been in Bay 3 when the boat sold. It should have gone aboard. Nobody had known what the rusted steel bar was, and Caleb had not been there to tell them. Caleb, I'm thinking. A gust drove rain beneath the porch. The green lamp swung against its bracket. He called Mara. She answered over engine noise. I heard the radio, she said. Where are you? Esperanza's coming around Bay Point. Don't cross Brant alone. I wasn't planning to. A second engine appeared through the rain. Captain Farlow's boat pushed toward the dock, bow rising hard in the chop. Earl's shrimper followed, deck lights glowing in the gray. Otis came running from the road, carrying coils of rope. June's welding truck stopped behind him. Leon arrived last, with a silver coffee urn belted into the passenger seat. Caleb stared. Otis shrugged into a rain slicker. News travels faster than weather. Mara brought Esperanza alongside. Her red cap was turned backward, rain running from its bill down her neck. Farlow takes the outside line, she said. Earl stays in his wake. We lead through the shoal. You've been organizing. You took too long thinking. Caleb boarded with a tool bag, chain, 2 lengths of cable, shackles, and the spare tiller arm from an old shrimp boat. It would not fit Sweet Caroline without modification. June saw it and held out her hand. 2 minutes. She carried the arm to her truck, cut the end with a torch, and welded on a fork sized from Caleb's measurements. Sparks vanished in the rain. Dean remained on the phone. What are you doing? He asked. Going out? No. Caleb almost smiled at the absurdity. Tell Travis to keep the bow into the waves with short throttle. No sharp corrections. Caleb, wait for a tow. Their drift puts them on Shellbank in 40 minutes. Dean knew that. Silence confirmed it. June plunged the glowing tiller arm into a bucket. Steam rolled around her. Leon pushed the coffee urn into Otis's arms. For when everybody's done being heroic and stupid. Otis carried it aboard. Caleb turned off the green lamp, then stopped. Through the rain, he could see the workboats holding near the dock, their lights aimed toward him. Boats that had come because Amos once answered. Boats that now came because Caleb did. He switched the lamp back on. "Leave it," Mara called. "We need to find home." June handed him the tiller arm. Caleb stepped aboard Esperanza. Mara opened the throttle, and First Light's dock fell behind them. At the mouth of the reeds, the full force of the wind struck. Esperanza rolled hard enough to throw Caleb against the rail. Farlow's boat vanished behind a wall of rain, then reappeared. Earl's lights held beyond him. Mara leaned over the wheel. "Still want to go?" she shouted. Caleb looked ahead, toward the shoal, and the brother who had not listened, the sister who had asked him to dinner, and the boat carrying his father's old lie into open water. "No," he said. Mara pushed the throttle forward. Good answer. Esperanza hit the first steep wave bow on. Water rose above the windows, turned the world green for half a second, then broke across the roof. Otis gripped the passenger rail with one hand and protected Leon's coffee urn with the other. "Priorities!" Mara shouted. "Coffee don't swim." Caleb braced against the console and watched the depth finder, Brant Shoal, climb beneath them, 12 feet becoming 9, then 7. Wind drove spray flat across the surface until the water seemed to smoke. 2 points east, he told Mara. "I know the channel. Bar moved after the storm." "What storm?" "The one that took the cabin roof." Mara corrected east without acknowledging it. Esperanza dropped into a trough, hard enough to rattle every tool in Caleb's bag. Farlow's boat appeared off their port quarter. Earl followed farther back, his shrimper's high bow breaking through the chop more heavily, but holding its line. Dean's voice came through Caleb's phone, distorted by wind. "They can see Shellbank. That's too close. Travis has the engine in reverse. Tell him short bursts only. If he holds reverse, the stern will come into the waves." Caleb switched to the VHF. "Sweet Caroline, First Light. Do you copy?" Static. Then Brooks' voice came through, thin but clear. "We copy." "Not Travis." "Brooke, what's your heading?" "Whatever the water wants, read the compass." A pause. 035, no, 028. "It won't hold. Can you see us?" "Not yet." Caleb looked ahead. Rain had reduced the world to 50 yards of gray. "Sound your horn." A faint blast answered from somewhere beyond the shoal. Mara turned toward it. Again, Caleb said into the radio. The horn sounded closer and farther east than expected. Mara swore and spun the wheel. Esperanza slid down a wave broadside, rolled, then climbed the next at an angle. Sweet Caroline appeared through the rain with her bow pointed south and her wake moving northeast. Travis stood at the open stern, one arm wrapped around a support. Brooke was at the console. 2 figures in red windbreakers sat on the deck wearing orange life jackets. The boat lay less than 300 yards from Shellbank. "Farlow, take her bow," Caleb called over the radio. "Earl, stay outside and keep us off the bank." Farlow answered, "Copy." Earl said something mostly swallowed by static, but his boat turned. Mara brought Esperanza along Sweet Caroline's lee side. The 2 hulls rose and fell at different times, closing the gap, then tearing it open. Travis threw a line. It fell short. "Again!" Mara shouted. He coiled it with wet hands. Caleb saw his brother's face. No polished smile, no irritation. Just fear held barely enough to remain useful. The second throw reached Otis, who caught it around his forearm and hauled the boats closer. Caleb clipped a safety tether to his belt and secured the other end around Esperanza's rail. Mara grabbed his sleeve. "No. I have to get aboard. Wait until Farlow has the bow. They hit Shellbank first." A wave slammed the hulls together. Rubber fenders screamed between them. Travis crouched at Sweet Caroline's rail and reached across. Caleb stepped onto Esperanza's gunwale. The boats separated. For 1 second, there was nothing beneath his forward foot but black water. Travis caught the shoulder strap of his life jacket and pulled as Caleb jumped. They landed together on Sweet Caroline's deck. Caleb's tool bag struck the rail. The zipper tore open. Sockets, pliers, and the modified tiller arm spilled across the deck. A wrench vanished through the scupper. Travis grabbed the arm before it followed. "What is this?" he shouted. "Steering. I found the rudder post." "Show me." Brooke stayed at the console, working the throttle in short bursts exactly as Caleb had told her. Rain ran down her face. One of the investors crouched beside the other, who had blood on his forehead from striking something when the steering failed. "He's conscious," Brooke said. "Cuts shallow. Keep him in the life jacket. He wants to know if we're going to sink." The injured man looked at Caleb. "No," Caleb said. It was not a pretty lie. It was the only kind the moment allowed. Farlow crossed ahead of them. Otis stood on Esperanza's bow with a coil of heavy line. On the second pass, he threw. Travis caught it and wrapped it around the forward cleat. The line came taut. Sweet Caroline's bow swung away from Shellbank. Everyone on deck moved half a step with the force. Caleb crawled beneath the aft bench. The access hatch had been removed. The top of the rudder post turned loosely as waves shoved the blade below. The cylinder rod had extended hard to starboard and stopped. Fluid streamed past the gland seal. "Bypassing?" Travis asked. "Yes." "So you were right. Get me the chain." Travis did not move. "Caleb, not now." His brother brought the chain. They disconnected the failed cylinder from the tiller head. Caleb fitted June's fork over the emergency post. It was half an inch too wide. "Doesn't fit," Travis said. "It fits loose." "That sounds bad. It's steering, not furniture." Caleb packed the gap with 2 steel washers from his bag and drove a bolt through the fork. The tiller arm rose from the post at an ugly angle but turned the rudder. He wrapped chain around the arm and shackled it twice. Cable. Travis handed him the first length. Caleb attached one cable to the port side of the arm, led it through a stern fair lead, and brought it onto the deck. The second ran starboard. Pulling one would turn the rudder. Easing it while pulling the other would bring it back. It required 2 people and constant attention. Mara came over the radio. "You have steering? Primitive. Primitive gets home." Another wave hit. The investor nearest the cabin slid across the deck. Brooke caught the back of his life jacket and hauled him against the bench. Caleb stared at her. "What?" she shouted. "Nothing." "Stop looking surprised and fix something." Farlow's tow line strained ahead. His boat could hold Sweet Caroline off the bank, but not tow her through the full wind alone. Earl moved to the port quarter and passed a second line. Caleb placed Travis on the starboard cable and took the port. "When I say left, you ease and I pull. Right, reverse. I understand left. You asked why a boat needed more than one hydraulic line." Travis looked at him across the tiller arm. "Really? No, not really." Brooke pushed the throttle forward. The engine answered. "Left," Caleb shouted. He hauled the port cable. Travis eased starboard. The tiller arm moved 6 inches, chain grinding against steel. Sweet Caroline's bow came around behind Farlow. For 3 minutes, the system worked. Then, the port cable slipped from Caleb's wet glove. The rudder snapped right. Sweet Caroline turned toward Esperanza. Mara opened her throttle and pulled away, but the charter boat's bow struck Esperanza's stern quarter. Fiberglass cracked. Otis fell against the coffee urn and went down. "Mara!" Caleb shouted into the radio. "I'm here." "Otis?" A moment passed. Otis's voice came faintly. "Coffee's dead," Mara said. "He's fine." "Urn's not," Otis added. Caleb retied the port cable around a short pipe for a handle. His palms were bleeding where the wire had cut through the gloves. "Again," Brooke said. He and Travis pulled together. Farlow guided the bow west. Earl held the stern off Shellbank. Esperanza moved ahead to mark the deepest water through the bar. Slowly, at less than 3 knots, the 4 boats crawled away from the bank. The injured investor began vomiting over the lee rail. The other held his jacket and apologized to everyone, though it was unclear for what. Rain kept coming. By the time Shellbank disappeared behind them, Farlow's engine temperature was rising. Earl's tow line had chafed halfway through its outer braid. Sweet Caroline's rudder post was hot from the chain grinding against it. The wind rose again. Mara's voice came over the radio. "We can't cross the open sound like this." Caleb knew she was right. Mercer Landing lay 9 miles west. with an exposed approach and its new floating guest pier broadside to the wind. North Creek? Travis suggested. Too shallow on this tide, Caleb said. Then where? Caleb pictured the coastline, the cuts through marsh grass, the narrow channel beside Little Heron Point. The cabin's dock sat inside the lee, protected from a west wind. 12 new feet of boards, one reinforced piling, one older outer section he still did not trust. First light. Travis stared at him. Your dock holds one boat. It's going to learn. Caleb called Dean. We have them off Shellbank, he said. His father exhaled. Caleb had not realized Dean was holding his breath. Bring them to Mercer. We can't. The South Pier is clear. The South Pier is exposed. Farlow's overheating, and we're steering Sweet Caroline with cables. Then where? My place. Silence. Caleb tightened his grip on the makeshift handle. Tell June we need every line she can find. Tell her brace the outer piling and clear the yard. Get dry clothes, blankets, first aid supplies. I'm at the marina, then drive. He ended the call. They could not make Little Heron Point before dark at 3 knots. An oyster creek behind Brant Island offered enough shelter to wait out the hardest wind. Mara led them in. Earl and Farlow dropped anchors on opposite sides of Sweet Caroline, while Caleb and Travis kept the rudder centered. For 7 hours, the boat strained against their lines. The investors stayed in the cabin under blankets. Brooke cleaned the cut on the injured man's forehead and found crackers nobody wanted. Travis sat on the aft deck beside the tiller cables. Caleb wrapped his palms with gauze from the first aid kit. You warned me, Travis said. Caleb tied the bandage with his teeth. I thought you wanted the trip to fail, Travis continued. I wanted you to cancel. I know that now. You knew it yesterday. Travis looked toward the black windows. I needed Dad to see I could bring in the investors. There it is. His brother's mouth twisted. Don't what? Act like you're the only one he makes stupid. Caleb leaned against the wet bulkhead. Travis rubbed both hands over his face. When you left, he started calling me first. That what you wanted? Yes. The answer was immediate and miserable. Then every call meant something was wrong, Travis said. A booking, a motor, a contractor. He never called because he wanted to hear me. Caleb looked at his brother's ruined leather shoes, soaked black and streaked with grease. You could have called me, Caleb said. You would have enjoyed it. Probably. Travis laughed once. Caleb looked at the cables between them. I still would have answered. Near 3 a.m, the wind dropped below 20 knots. Rain softened to mist. They raised anchor and started home. Esperanza led through the narrow channel. Farlow's boat held Sweet Caroline's bow. Earl steadied the stern, and Caleb and Travis worked the cables in the dark. As they rounded Little Heron Point, the fog lifted enough to show the cabin. The green lamp burned above the porch. June had lined the dock with every work light Caleb owned. Leon stood in the yard beside a new coffee urn. Dean waited at the end of the reinforced piling, raincoat open, one hand gripping a line. Sweet Caroline entered first. Behind her came Farlow, Earl, and Esperanza, their lights filling the mist from bank to bank. Caleb guided the final turn. Left. Travis eased. Caleb pulled. The hull settled against the dock without striking it. Dean caught the bowline. For a moment, nobody moved. The engine idled. Water tapped the boards. Amos's lamp cast a green curve across Dean's gray hair. Caleb stepped ashore. His father looked at the blood soaking through the bandages on his hands. He reached toward him, stopped, and closed his fingers around empty air. Behind Caleb, the boats kept arriving. Caleb looked past Dean toward the dock. Take that stern line. His father caught it without argument. Farlow brought his boat against the outer piling, while June shouted directions from shore. Earl held in the channel until Mara cleared Esperanza from Sweet Caroline's quarter. Otis stepped onto the dock, carrying the dented coffee urn like a casualty. Leon examined it. Can it be saved? Have to run tests. Don't give me false hope. The absurd conversation loosened something in the yard. People began moving again. Brooke helped the investors ashore. The man with the cut swayed when his feet reached solid ground, and June sat him in the intact porch chair before he could object. She removed Brooke's bandage, inspected the wound, and replaced it with a cleaner one. You a nurse? He asked. Welder. He stared at her. Same principle, June said. Keep the inside in. The second investor accepted coffee from Leon and held the cup with both hands. His red windbreaker had torn beneath one arm. He looked at Caleb. "You run this place?" "Some days." The man glanced at the collapsed section of kitchen still partitioned behind heavy plastic, then at the collection of boats crowding the dock. "Interesting operation. That's a kind word for it." Brooke sat on the porch step. Water ran from her hair and collected beneath her boots. When Caleb came close, she grabbed the front of his jacket and pulled him into her. The hug was fierce and uncomfortable. His bandaged hands hung uselessly at his sides. "You're hurting me," he said. "Good." Her voice broke against his chest. He lowered one arm around her shoulders. Travis remained aboard Sweet Caroline, staring at the emergency steering. The chain had chewed bright scars into the tiller arm. Both cables were frayed where Caleb and Travis had pulled against them. Dean stepped onto the boat. "We'll have her towed to the marina when the wind settles," he said. "No," Travis answered. Dean paused. "No what?" "No more patching it." "Nobody said patch. Caleb warned us. We all heard him." "No." Travis looked toward the porch, where the investors sat wrapped in blankets. "He warned me before we bought the new boats. He warned us yesterday. I went anyway." Dean glanced at the two men. Travis saw it. "Don't worry, they already know." The injured investor touched the fresh bandage above his eyebrow. "We know." Dean's face tightened. "This isn't the place." "Where is?" Travis asked. Dean looked as if he might answer with anger. Then his gaze dropped to the improvised tiller. "There isn't one," he said. It was not an apology, but it was the first time Caleb had heard his father decline a hiding place. The road remained flooded, and the wind still pushed hard through the live oaks. Everyone stayed. The cabin had one dry room large enough for 12 adults, if nobody valued dignity. June found blankets in the storage chest. Leon heated canned soup on the camp stove and added enough pepper to disguise its origin. Brooke wore one of Caleb's work shirts over her wet clothes. The sleeves hung past her hands. Travis sat on an overturned bucket and borrowed socks because his leather shoes had become small brown aquariums. Mara took the stool beside the workbench. A bruise darkened one cheek where Esperanza's console had struck her. Caleb touched it with 2 fingers. She winced. "That your medical technique? June's busy, then keep the inside in." He looked toward the dock. Esperanza's stern quarter showed a pale crack beneath the rub rail. "I hit you! Sweet Caroline hit me. I lost the cable. In weather. I should have tied a handle first." Mara caught his wrist before he could turn away. "You can inspect your guilt tomorrow. I'm tired." She rested her forehead against his shoulder. Across the room, Dean watched them. He looked away when Caleb noticed. Amos's clock ticked above the bench. Every few minutes, somebody checked it as if dawn required supervision. Dean wandered toward the wooden cubbies. He crouched and read the names written on the paper sacks. Boone, Talley, Velez, Farlow. His fingers stopped on one marked Dean. Caleb had never opened it. Dean pulled the sack out. Inside was an old fuel pump diaphragm, a brass carburetor float, and a throttle spring wrapped in wax paper. A note was folded around the spring. Dean read it without showing anyone. "What is it?" Brooke asked. "Parts for the Chris Craft." "What Chris Craft?" "My first boat." Dean sat back on his heels. "Dad sold it 40 years ago." Nobody spoke. He folded the note along its existing creases and returned it to the sack. "What did it say?" Caleb asked. Dean slid the bag into its cubby. Said, "I'd need the spring eventually." "That sounds like him." "Yes." The word came out rough. Around 4:30, the rain stopped. Fog thickened across the sound, trapping the dock lights in white halos. Farlow and Earl slept aboard their boats. The investors stretched out on the cabin floor. Brooke used Caleb's folded jacket as a pillow. Caleb found Dean alone at the end of the dock. His father stood beneath the green light, with both hands in his raincoat pockets. Sweet Caroline moved beside him, restrained by 4 lines. "You should get dry," Caleb said. "So should you." Neither moved. Dean looked toward the boats in the fog. "All those people came when you called. They heard the radio." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make less of it so nobody can take it from you." Caleb glanced at him. Dean's eyes remained on the water. "I thought I taught you that," he said. "Maybe I did. You taught me a man's name means he was there." Dean closed his eyes briefly. Caleb waited. This time he did not rescue him from the silence. "I signed your name," Dean said. "I knew you wouldn't." "Yes. I told myself the steering had passed at the dock. I told myself the sail kept everybody working. Then you said no in front of Travis, and all I could hear was my own son telling me I didn't get to decide. You didn't, I know. The answer was too late, but it was not nothing." Dean rubbed his thumb over a crack in the piling. "I was wrong." Caleb had imagined hearing those words so many times that the real ones seemed smaller. They did not reopen the office door or put the keys back on his belt. They did not return the year above Leon's bait shop. They did not let Amos say what he had waited too long to say. "I don't know what to do with that yet," Caleb said. Dean nodded. "Come back anyway," he said. "Not as an employee. We could combine the service work. You'd run it." Caleb almost smiled. Even stripped of his certainty, Dean tried to rebuild with ownership. "No, you haven't thought about it. I have. Mercer Landing has proper bays, lifts, inventory. You're doing good work out here, but this road floods. The dock barely held tonight. It held. This place will always be one storm from trouble. So is yours." Dean looked toward the cabin, the repaired metal roof, the old wall June had braced, the lamp burning where Amos's had burned. "You saved your brother and sister," he said. "We saved everybody. Fine, all of you. And that doesn't mean I come back. I'm not trying to buy you. You don't know how to ask without offering a roof." The sentence hurt him. Caleb saw it happen. Dean stared down at the water. "What should I offer?" he asked. "Nothing? That doesn't leave much. You could call when you don't need something." Fog drifted between the dock lights. Dean gave a quiet, tired laugh. "I wouldn't know what to say." "Start with that." Behind them, the cabin door opened. Travis stepped onto the porch and borrowed socks. "Brooks says the injured investor is asking for his phone," he called. Leon hid all the phones in a tackle box. "Why?" Dean asked. "He said nobody with a head wound should be allowed to call a lawyer before coffee." Dean went inside to handle it. Travis joined Caleb on the dock. For a while they looked at Sweet Caroline. "I was wrong," Travis said. "He beat you to it." "Dad said that?" "Don't sound so offended." Travis rubbed his arms against the cold. "I didn't back you in the office." "No, I knew the steering had failed. I didn't know he'd sign your name, but when he did, I let him. Yes, I thought if you left, there'd finally be room for me." Caleb looked at his brother. "There was always room, not the kind I wanted. Did you get it?" Travis watched the cabin window. Dean's shape moved behind the glass. For a while. Caleb nodded. Travis gestured towards Sweet Caroline. "Will you rebuild the cylinder?" "Yes." "What'll you charge?" "Full rate." "You do family discounts?" "I charge family extra." "That sounds right." At sunrise, the fog thinned. The investors left in Brooks' SUV after declining Dean's offer to continue their presentation over breakfast. One of them shook Caleb's hand carefully around the bandages. "This doesn't mean we're investing," he said. "I don't own anything you'd invest in." The man looked at First Light's crowded dock. "You might?" Caleb did not mistake the comment for a prophecy. By the following week, the man sent a thank you card and nothing else. That was enough. Sweet Caroline remained at First Light for 18 days. Travis came each morning in work boots and clothes he could ruin. He helped Caleb remove the cylinder, order a new rod, and rebuild the assembly properly. The first time Caleb told him to clean the workbench, Travis asked which employee handled that. Caleb handed him a rag. Brooke resigned from Mercer Landing's marketing operation before Christmas. She did not escape the cottage loans, and Dean did not forgive the timing. She sold one of the 3 cottages rather than let the marina decide the fate of all of them, paid down the debt tied to her share, and moved her office into the smallest remaining rental. When she told Caleb, she stood beneath the First Light sign, pretending the cold made her eyes water. "I'm starting over with 2 houses and no tasting room," she said. "Sounds appropriate." She hit his arm. Then she took over First Light's monthly books for an actual fee, because Caleb had learned that gratitude did not pay honest labor. Their first bookkeeping meeting ended with Brooke accusing him of hiding invoices, and Caleb accusing her folders of multiplying in darkness. They had dinner afterward. Dean did not come. He called the following Sunday at 7 in the evening, when the lamp was off. Caleb answered. "Wasn't sure you'd pick up," Dean said. "Wasn't sure either." There was a pause. "You eat?" Dean asked. "Yep." "What?" "Food," Dean grunted. Your conversation's gotten expensive. You calling about a boat? No? Another pause. Caleb waited. Dean told him the tasting room's vent fan had started rattling and that the new mechanic said it was not his department. Caleb told him it was probably a loose bearing and did not offer to drive over. The call lasted 6 minutes. The next week it lasted 9. Mercer Landing did not collapse. It became smaller than Dean had planned. The investors passed. One delayed charter boat was canceled. Travis converted an unused bay back into a repair area and put gloves on the shelves near the register. Dean complained that they sold slowly. Caleb told him to give it 6 years. First Light became a business by degrees instead of miracle. The roof was paid off in February. The road flooded twice in March. Caleb raised his labor rate again in April and lost one customer who returned 3 weeks later with an apology and a ruined starter. Otis continued handling one morning a week. June welded a proper cradle for the outer piling and accepted a check without hiding it under anything. Leon replaced the lost coffee urn, then labeled it rescue equipment so nobody used it casually. Mara's stern repair took 2 weekends because she rejected Caleb's first fiberglass color match as sad oatmeal. She kept the invoice, paid it in full, and kissed him after criticizing the sanding. She called Mateo from the porch one evening. Caleb stayed inside and tried not to listen. He heard her say, Esperanza ran better than ever, then heard a silence long enough to hold years. I was angry, Mara said. That doesn't mean I wanted you gone. Later, she came inside with red eyes and asked whether he had coffee. He made it without advice. By summer, one of her mugs lived beside his sink. By autumn, she had a key to the cabin and another to the tool shed. She still arrived by boat more often than by road, sometimes before dawn, sometimes after the lamp went dark. If Caleb was working too late, she turned it off herself. On the anniversary of Amos's death, Caleb woke before the clock alarm. The cabin was quiet. Mara slept with one arm across his side, her hand resting over the scar the wire cable had left on his palm. He eased out from beneath it and dressed in the dark. Outside, the sound lay black and still. Caleb switched on the green lamp. He filled the old percolator and set it on the stove. Amos's coffee tins remained above the bench, though Caleb had replaced their contents so many times that only the labels were original. The cubbies held new sacks beside the old ones. A work schedule waited on Brooks' clipboard. Sunday afternoon had been blocked out in Mara's handwriting. He carried 2 cups onto the porch. An engine sounded beyond the reeds, then another. Running lights appeared across the water, one by one. Esperanza's empty slip waited at the dock, but it was Farlow's boat leading this morning, with Earl behind him and 3 others farther out. Nobody sounded a distress horn. No engine coughed. They were bringing work, coffee, breakfast, and complaints that would improve with repetition. Mara stepped onto the porch wearing his jacket. Emergency? She asked. Caleb watched the first boat turn toward the lamp. No. Farlow tossed a rope from the dark. Caleb caught it with both hands.